Chapter 100. It turned out that she was the imperial concubine Long who claimed to be ill all year round. If Gong Yimo was here, she would really praise her. What a devastatingly beautiful and delicate beauty, she blinked, her limpid eyes full of worry. Your Majesty need not be too worried. I think those rumors are not true. The Crown Prince may have really been attacked by an assassin and cannot return to the capital. It's not that he has a rebellious heart and used the excuse of being attacked by an assassin to refuse to return to the capital. Your Majesty, please don't be angry. Her words were slow and very weak, but it made Emperor Cheng's mood turn cold little by little. Emperor Cheng's face was as calm as water, and his face twitched twice. It's best that he doesn't have such thoughts. Only I can give my position, no one can snatch it. With that, he strode out of the hall and prepared to leave the palace. He wanted to personally welcome his son who had won the hearts of the people after not seeing him for more than a year. Long Xiangxiang looked at the emperor's departing back and covered her mouth to smile. Long Ting River was the moat, and the east gate was the closest gate to the moat. At this time, the emperor stood on the gate with hundreds of officials, looking into the distance. Unlike Emperor Cheng's complicated emotions, the officials also had different expressions. Some were worried and anxious, some were calm and collected, and some were tense as if they were preparing for war. It wasn't until the giant ship slowly approached under the escort of countless people that they couldn't restrain their surprise any longer. They all exclaimed in surprise. It was too big, too big. It was like a palace. No wonder so many people were needed to pull it, they had never seen such a huge ship. Someone seized the opportunity to whisper behind the emperor, it's just an assassination attempt, but he has to take such a big ship back to the capital. The Crown Prince is not the emperor yet, but he dares to waste people's money and be so arrogant and extravagant. If he really becomes the emperor, I don't know how many people he will harm for his own desires. When Emperor Qing heard it, he couldn't help but look back at the person beside the left Prime Minister. This glance made the person who spoke feel a chill down his spine, and he shut his mouth in embarrassment, not daring to raise his head again. But even if he didn't say it, someone else would. The Crown Prince's character has never been like this. I've long heard that the Crown Prince dug out the cauldron of King Wu that had sunk into the Jade Dragon Cauldron years ago. There was also a prophecy on the cauldron to save the world. The Crown Prince must have been flattered by a slanderous official. That's why the Crown Prince became so ignorant. TSK, a cultivator of the Canal River will bring glory to the world. How arrogant! Their words made Gong Cheng's heart sink deeper and deeper. He thought of Gong Yimo's Yuluin, which was said to be able to shake the heavens and break the earth, and the Crown Prince dug out the bronze cauldron of prophecy. He gradually became anxious, and his eyes became colder and sharper. Seeing that the boat was getting closer, he waved his hand, and the people in the dark immediately got ready for battle. More than 5,000 Imperial Army soldiers surrounded the eastern city gate. As they watched the approaching ship, they were perplexed. If they really wanted to rebel, why did they have to make such a big fuss? They were getting closer, countless students gathered at the foot of the city. Feeling the tense atmosphere inside and outside the city, they held their heads high and their backs straight. In the end, they all knelt down. Your Majesty, long live the Emperor! Long live! Long live! The earth-shaking kowtows pulled Gong Qing back to reality. He looked at the crowd of people kneeling at the foot of the city. His expression was complicated and puzzled. Why were they so obedient and devout to worship him? What kind of trick was Gong Yimo playing? The giant ship gradually stopped. It was only 20 to 30 meters away from the city gate. Many people came down from the ship and kowtowed to the emperor. But the city gate was closed, and there was no sign of it opening. Gong Cheng's pair of tiger-like eyes stared at the ship. there were still people who didn't come down. It was only when most of the people had come down that someone carried Gong Che down. Thankfully, after a few days of treatment, Gong Che had already survived this ordeal. Once he woke up, he would be able to recuperate properly. Gong Ching glanced at Gong Che. Although he was far away, his pale appearance couldn't deceive people. Moreover, Changshi followed Gong Che all the way. They couldn't disguise themselves. So, Gong Che was really attacked by an assassin and was seriously injured. Gong Cheng's eyes narrowed. Why did his intelligence say that Gong Che was not seriously injured? How many tricks were there in this? He no longer thought about it. His eyes were still staring at the giant ship. There were still people who didn't come down. That ship was really high. The mast was even higher than the city gate. Now that they were so close, people could clearly see how magnificent and exquisite the ship was. Gong Ching didn't admit that he was jealous. His dragon ship wasn't so magnificent. At this time, Changshi had already sneaked to Gong Cheng's side. There were still people. Gong Yimo hadn't come down yet. As if to cater to his thoughts, a pale figure appeared, but she didn't get off the ship. Instead, she stood on the deck. Because the ship was very high, Gong Ching could clearly see how weak she was now. Her pale face was bloodless, and her eyes were staring at him coldly. Changshi looked at Gong Yimo like this. His whole body was on guard, ready to protect the emperor at any time. Along the way, he really couldn't figure out what Gong Yimo was selling. Since she woke up 2 days ago, she didn't say a word except for thanking the people once. Hearing Changshi's vigilant and whispered back, Gong Cheng's heart ached. He didn't expect that Gong Che was really dying, and he issued such a decree at such a time. So much so that the child in front of him was forced to vomit blood. He really couldn't imagine that the mentally tough Gong Yimo would vomit blood one day. She dared to kill people in front of the emperor to ask for a reward when she was 10 years old. She dared to use meritorious service in exchange for the lives of the Liu family when he was angry. She dared to send Gong Dai to the West Continent openly and dared to draw a path to heaven for Gong Che in a difficult situation. Would a woman like her also have a time when she was helpless to vomit blood? Gong Yimo stood alone on the deck. The wind tore at her thin but tall body. She held the exquisite carved railing and smiled at the people on the city gate. Long time no see, Your Majesty. It was as if they were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers. She was obviously close at hand, but she was far away at the end of the world. Gong Ching still remembered that she used to sweetly call him Father Emperor, coaxing him to be happy, and then shamelessly asking him to reward her. But now, she stood on the opposite side of him and coldly called him Your Majesty. Gong Ching felt quite uncomfortable, but his eyes still stared at her majestically. He wanted to see what kind of trick she was going to play. Bold. Why don't you kneel when you see His Majesty? Someone beside the emperor reacted and quickly jumped out to accuse her. Gong Yimo was too lazy to look at him. His Majesty has specially allowed me not to salute in front of anyone. Who do you think you are? Is it your turn to speak? The official choked. He wanted to say that she was a commoner and he, as a first-rank minister, couldn't speak. But when he caught a glimpse of the emperor's unhappy eyes, his heart trembled and he quickly retreated. Mor. Gong Ching pointed to the students and commoners under the city gate with an unhappy expression. After saluting, these people firmly guarded the two sides of the ship, as if they were afraid that he would explode and hurt people. You brought these people and drove the ship straight to the imperial city. What do you want? Chapter 101. He spoke calmly, but his tone was very dangerous, revealing the pressure of an emperor. Gong Yimo raised her head and looked straight at him, saying loudly, "Of course. I'm here to complain to you." Her words made everyone present have different expressions. Emperor Qing was silent for a moment, glancing at the many people below, and said coldly, "Who do you want to complain to?" Gong Yimo smiled slightly, looking tired, but her movements were very graceful as she bowed. "This humble girl has 3 complaints. I hope your majesty can make a decision." "Speak." Gong Emo didn't seem to be the slightest bit afraid of the emperor's aura. She looked at the people on the wall, who were all staring at her like a tiger watching its prey. It was as if the words that came out of her mouth were not words, but blades. The sky was gloomy, large black clouds gathered, as if it was going to rain. The winter wind was biting cold and tearing. Gong Yimo tidied the hair by her ear, took a deep breath, and said calmly, "First, I'm going to complain to the princes." Her gaze fell on the princes of different ages behind the ministers, but she only glanced at them indifferently, as if she was disdainful. Since the construction of the canal began to be successful, there have been countless people who secretly tried to trip us up. Especially the frequent movements of the clans behind the princes. We have been wholeheartedly at the front line, working hard day and night. But there are so many people who not only don't want to leave your majesty's sight to seek favor, but also want to reap without sowing. Their actions are despicable. She didn't point at anyone, but her tone of disgust made many people's hearts tremble. But at this time, the common people were watching, so even if those princes were angry in their hearts, they could not show it. They were afraid that if they opened their mouths at this time, they would be remembered by the students below and be condemned in speech and writing. So they could only glare fiercely at Gong Yimo. When the emperor heard this, he could not help but think of the 1.5 years when the crown prince was building the canal. The princes secretly squeezed him, and the concubines from time to time, and he could not say anything to refute. If it were not for his strong support, the canal would only be half built now. Thinking of this, Emperor Qing felt unreasonably disgusted with those people. This humble girl's second complaint. Tell the minister. Without waiting for Gong Qing to react, Gong Yimo's slender finger pointed at the people on the city wall. Her small face was pale as she sneered. The crown prince was almost killed by an assassination attempt, but when it reached His Highness's ears, it was as if the crown prince had deliberately faked an assassination attempt in order to avoid returning to the capital. As a result, His Majesty issued 3 imperial edicts to force the crown prince to return to the capital. The crown prince almost died on the way back. As a minister, you don't think about how to benefit the people, don't think about how to develop and innovate. Your structure and vision are actually limited to fighting for favor, framing, and eliminating dissidents like the women in the harem. Your actions are like those of the sages. She mocked him coldly, each and every one of her words ringing in his ears. As for the ministers around the emperor, some of them were ashamed, some of them were pale, and some of them were flustered and exasperated. You're simply slandering me. You keep saying that you're defending the crown prince, but you're just trying to get the crown prince off the hook. He had just dug out the copper cauldron with the words "the builder of the canal, long lay the world," and now he was saying that he had been assassinated and was on the verge of death. Who knows if the crown prince was blown away by the vile people around him, or because of the prophecy of blessing the world, that's why he disobeyed the imperial edicts. A minister fiercely stared at Gong Yimo. You keep saying that the crown prince is in danger, but didn't he come back safe and sound? His meaning was very clear. He was saying that Gong Che was pretending, and Gong Yimo was here just to wash away Gong Che's crime of rebellion. Gong Yimo laughed out loud. Your Majesty. Do you also think so? Gong Cheng's lips moved, but in the end, he didn't open his mouth. From Chang Shi's report, he might have wronged the crown prince, but that giant cauldron was like a thorn that pierced his suspicious heart. The man who built the canal will bless the world. Gong Yimo touched her chin and suddenly laughed. You. Do you want me to be the empress? These words were simply treasonous. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Without waiting for Changxi to boldly shout, Gong Yimo leisurely turned around on the deck. She looked at herself and said in astonishment, "I actually didn't know that I had the talent to be the emperor." Impudent. Gong Cheng's face was livid as he hammered the siege wall. Who gave her the courage to say such words in front of the whole world? He even wanted to directly let Changxi kill Gong Yimo, lest she continue to mislead the public with her lies. But Gong Yimo looked up at the emperor doubtfully. "Isn't it so? Your Majesty, don't you know that it was my idea to build the canal?" His words made Gong Ching choke, and Gong Yimo pointed at the minister who spoke just now and sneered, "And didn't he say that the man who built the canal will bless the world?" Then, as the instigator who proposed and planned this matter, wasn't the prophecy referring to her? Some officials were immediately dissatisfied, and the left prime minister directly jumped out and said, "You don't need to mislead the public with your lies to whitewash the crown prince. The crown prince built the canal and won the hearts of the people. These people at the city gate are the evidence. He is the man who built the canal, and also the person who the people support." Then, how could the prophecy not refer to the crown prince? After saying that, he felt that he had misspoken, but before he could add anything to cover it up, Gong Yimo glanced at him and laughed arrogantly. Her laughter contained inner force, and it spread far and wide. It made people inexplicably uneasy. "Then you're wrong." After Gong Yimo finished speaking, she suddenly jumped up and onto the pillar between the railings in front of her. The wind tore her long hair, making her look like she was about to fly, but she stood so straight. Her entire body seemed to extend from her spine to endless strength. She stood on the bow of the ship with an indomitable spirit. Many people cried out in alarm, afraid that she would fall, but Gong Yimo looked up to the sky and laughed. Her sleeves fluttered as she raised her arm and shouted, "Look carefully. These people. They're all here because of me. I'm the one who built the canal, I'm the one who won the hearts of the people. In terms of merit, my reputation will spread far and wide. I, Gong Yimo, am here. Who dares to fight for the peak?" Her words were like a clap of thunder, and her momentum was monstrous. It made many people panic, and they felt a sense of admiration and fear. But the response was like a tide. All the students and people heard this and knelt down, bowing their heads and shouting piously, "I swear to serve the princess. I'll die 10,000 deaths. I'll die 10,000 deaths." The earth-shattering words were like an oath, and it made many people on the city wall feel admiration and admiration. Even those who hated her were convinced. But was Gong Yimo crazy? Even if she wanted to exonerate Gong Che, she shouldn't take this kind of capital crime on herself. Seeing Gong Yimo's appeal with his own eyes, Gong Ching felt a deep sense of shock and fear. He really didn't expect that a woman could not only gain the gratitude of the people, but also gain the recognition of so many students. These scholars they looked down on women the most. Why did Gong Yimo have such appeal and charm, to make so many students bow down to her? He looked deeply at Gong Yimo. But there was a slight tremor in his voice. "What about the third complaint?" Gong Yimo's eyes met his in an instant. That obviously young and tender face showed an inharmonious sadness that went deep into the bone marrow. "The third complaint, I'll sue your Majesty." Chapter 102. Her last word was so light that it directly dissipated in the wind. She looked deeply at Gong Ching. For some reason, those eyebrows that were extremely similar to concubine Shui's overlapped at this moment, but they reflected a completely different human brilliance. Gong Cheng's heart trembled. Ignoring the voices of opposition around him, he softly asked, "What do you want to sue me for?" Gong Yimo smiled palely and straightened her back. Although she was alone, standing on the deck facing hundreds of people on the city wall, her back seemed to be supported by endless strength. She had to do this. I want to sue you, disregarding the relationship between husband and wife, you're not worthy of being a husband. Disregarding the relationship between father and son, you're not worthy of being a father. Disregarding the people of Daybreak, you're not worthy of being a ruler. Disregarding. You and I are father and daughter. These few years, bits and pieces. Gong Cheng's heart suddenly hurt. His hands were tightly clenched on the city wall, and his body was very tense. His eyes stared at the little person without blinking, as if he could see through her. Her previous words and sentences were complaints for others, but the last few words were inexplicably tactful and sorrowful, as if a knife was cutting into his heart. Gong Cheng seemed to see the appearance of a little girl crying alone, and this child was only 13. Gong Yimo quickly collected her emotions and laughed softly. You and the Empress have been husband and wife for more than 20 years. Even if she didn't have any merits, she still worked hard. It's understandable that she made a mistake and entered the temple to cultivate. But her only son was excluded from living in this world, and you didn't take care of him. Are you worthy of the Empress' expectations for you? Why did the Crown Prince go out to build the canal? He also wanted to be by your side, but you forced him to take this step, forced him to make a name for himself. And he finally made some achievements, but because you listened to slanderous words, the Crown Prince's efforts of more than a year went down the drain. Are you worthy of the Crown Prince's admiration for you? Gong Cheng admitted her words, but he wholeheartedly served the country and the people. How could he let down the people of Daybreak? So he looked cold and pointed to the people under the city gate. Since I ascended the throne, I've worked hard every day, reduced taxes, recruited talents, and improved the imperial examination. How have I let down the people of Daybreak? He was also very angry that he said such angry words to Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo shook her head. Because you want to start a war. Her words silenced everyone on the city wall, and the commoners began to panic. Was there going to be a war? Why didn't they receive any news at all? Gong Cheng stared blankly, knowing that she was finally talking about that thing. But what did he do wrong? Wasn't he doing this for the sake of the people of Daiyu State? Haha. What do you mean I want to go to war? I'm doing this because I want to protect the country without any effort. What's the difference? After he finished speaking, he finally pointed at Gong Yimo with some resentment. You, on the other hand, have a weapon that can intimidate the world, yet you refuse to hand it over. What are your intentions? The emperor's words confused the people. The princess had a weapon that could intimidate the world. Some of the smarter ones couldn't help but think of the miracle of the princess breaking mountains and filling rivers, and started to ponder. Seeing this, Gong Yimo was not anxious at all. She smiled and asked softly, I wonder how the person who betrayed me described that thing to you. She admitted that she really had a very powerful weapon in her hands. Gong Cheng snorted coldly, the power to break mountains and rivers, and make the sun and moon lose their color. Ha 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 ha. Gong Yimo laughed out loud. After laughing, she suddenly raised her eyebrows. Since that's the case, I'll let everyone see what the so-called power to break mountains and rivers, and make the sun and moon lose color is. With that, she flipped her hand and suddenly took out something that looked like a firework tube. Everyone's eyes immediately converged on it. They watched as Gong Yimo calmly lit it up, and then threw it directly into the water in front of her. The process was so simple that it could be said that anyone could do it. But all they heard was a loud bang. The ship flipped backward, and the water in front of the ship suddenly exploded. A water column that was dozens of feet high exploded. The sudden water splashed on the faces of the people on the city wall. Chang Shik hurriedly stood in front of Gong Cheng, fearing that it was Gong Yimo's sneak attack. When the deafening explosion was over, the water in the river was crazily tumbling and turbid. The ship violently swayed backward before coming to a stop. Faint smoke filled the air, making the already gloomy sky even gloomier. Many people on the city wall heard a buzzing sound in their ears, but they excitedly looked at Gong Yimo. This was the item that even the emperor wanted. All the people were dumbstruck. It was just a small thing, but it had such power. The water column that suddenly rose. The impact that made the ship flip. This was still in the water. If it was on land, who knows what kind of destructive power it would have. This kind of power, is it actually achievable by human strength? Many princes couldn't help but stare at Gong Yimo, as if they want to strip her naked. Dig out all her secrets. Such a powerful thing, not only the emperor wants it, they also want it. Gong Cheng's mood fluctuated even more. He pushed Changxi away and leaned against the city wall. Looking at the still tumbling river, his heart kept thinking, if we have this thing, when Lu Yi invades, we can easily win. Perhaps we can even become famous in one battle, and completely establish Dayu State's identity as the overlord of the Central Plains. The blood of ambition kept pounding against his chest. No, perhaps he could still pursue the victory. Perhaps, he could still unify the Central Plains in his lifetime. Gong Cheng wanted to speak, but found that his throat was dry and hoarse. Li Ke didn't lie to him. This was really something that all emperors wanted. Gong Yimo acted as if nothing had happened. When the ship gradually stopped, she patted the non-existent dust on her hands and smiled faintly. Do you think it's very powerful? Her cold tone was like a basin of water splashed, magically calming Gong Cheng down. He really wanted it, and it wasn't just him. Presumably, no man would be able to resist its charm. Gong Che seemed to be able to feel countless suppressed and scorching breaths behind him. But, look at them. Gong Yimo pointed at the commoners under the city gate. Gong Yimo didn't remind them just now, so they were closer and felt the destructive power more directly. Their faces were pale. Their legs trembled, and they couldn't recover for a long time. Those in power only saw the benefits brought by absolute power, while the commoners were more rational. Only they could see the disaster, slaughter, and destruction brought by this power. The harm was far more than the benefits. Gong Yimo sighed, and her expression was cold and desolate. She looked at Gong Cheng, who was looking at the commoners. His mouth was slightly open and his face was cold, but he couldn't say a word. Chapter 103. This thing, to make it, it's not difficult, but it's not easy either. But if it's mass-produced, I dare say that under the threat of death, it's only a matter of time before others want to imitate it. The officials didn't have any reaction to her words, but the commoners' faces turned even paler. They couldn't imagine what would happen if this thing fell on them, in the fields, in the academy. Gong Yimo looked straight ahead and sighed, but this thing is also very good. If I use it to dig a canal, it can shorten the time of 6 to 7 years by more than half. So much so that I'm standing here on a boat. Not only that, it can be used to build roads, open mountains, and mine. There are countless uses, but it can also be used to kill people. She smiled bitterly and looked at the emperor, who was silent for a long time. So your majesty, you can be afraid or angry, whatever. This thing, when the moral standards of the people are not up to standard, I won't hand it over. Don't you think about how many children you have and how many concubines you have. You may be able to suppress them when you're here, but what about when you're not? Will their ambitions be smaller than yours? One evil thought is enough to split this fertile land into pieces. After that, she bowed deeply in the direction of the commoners. Previously, I lied to everyone, saying that I had the ability to cut mountains and rivers, and in order to continue digging, I lied to everyone that the canal was built by heaven. I admit it. Now that Lu Yi is invading and the war is imminent, I'm not willing to hand over this thing. Everyone should blame me, but I, Gong Yimo, swear here. If our Dayu state doesn't have it, other countries won't have it either. This oath can be witnessed by heaven and earth. If I violate this oath, I will die a horrible death, and be abandoned by both God and man. Saying this, she lifted her clothes and knelt down, bowing her head in deep repentance. I beg for heaven's forgiveness. I, Gong Yimo, am guilty. I have a weapon in my hand, but I'm not willing to contribute to the war. I, Gong Yimo, am guilty. I've caused the crown prince to fall into such a situation, his life and death unknown. I, Gong Yimo, am guilty. Because of me, ninth brother can't be helped. Her voice became louder and louder, as if she was reading her own sin to heaven. It also seemed like she was dissatisfied and rebelling. Every word and sentence was filled with tears of blood. But her expression was cold and stern, as if the deep mockery in her words didn't exist. Finally, she smiled weakly and looked at the emperor. And your majesty, I, Gong Yimo, am guilty, but I am willing to accept any punishment and am prepared to face it all. And you, are you sure you can defend it? Have you ever thought about the consequences of taking what belongs to me? The ambition to unify the Central Plains and the battles for the imperial power might put countless people in danger because of one wrong decision of yours. Did you really consider these consequences when your ambitions were inflated? Are your actions really worthy of the people of Dawn? Gong Cheng's face was deathly pale. He couldn't get off the stage. He looked at the people below. At this time, they had forgotten their fear and were looking straight at him. It was as if his will would decide their life and death. But he couldn't refuse. Before he had seen the power of the United States, he could still comfort himself that others were exaggerating. But now that he had seen it, it didn't matter if he couldn't get it. But what if someone from another country got it? He had to think about it. What oath? What responsibility? He couldn't do it. But Gong Yimo, a woman, could do it. Unless she was dead. Gong Yimo slowly stood up. Looking at Gong Cheng's murderous eyes, she felt pain in her heart. Her eyes couldn't help but shed tears. Father Emperor. Do you still remember that I am your daughter? I was once your most beloved daughter. In order to win your smile. How many things have I done? Do you still remember everything in the past? Her voice wasn't loud, but it was heart-wrenching. Many people were moved. She was like an ordinary girl seeking her father's love. She complained with grievance and sorrow. Her young face was full of tears. They didn't understand why the princess was so good. Why did the princess wholeheartedly serve the people with good intentions? Why did she stand on the opposite side of the emperor and bear the coercion of the imperial power alone? This was wrong. The princess wasn't wrong. Gong Cheng's heart ached. He turned his eyes away, not daring to look at her. She wasn't his biological daughter, but Gong Cheng couldn't deny that the affection he had for this daughter was much more than all of his biological daughters put together. But why didn't she believe him? Speaking of the word believe, Gong Cheng smiled bitterly. Yes, he also couldn't believe that Gong Yimo would keep this weapon for a lifetime. Wasn't Gong Yimo the same? She also didn't believe in him. She was afraid of causing chaos in the world. Both of them were thinking from the perspective of the world, but they could only oppose each other. Both of them knew that this was a dead knot that could not be untied. Gong Yimo finally wiped her tears. At this time, her sad and gloomy appearance made many neutral ministers unable to bear it. They couldn't help but think, there were so many husbands in the world, but how many could be compared to this child in front of them? Gong Cheng slowly opened his mouth after a long time. Your 3 requests, Zhen, received. Gong Yimo looked sad. She bowed and bowed to the ground. But I still have 3 wishes. I need your Majesty's permission. Gong Qing slightly choked. Speak. First wish, these common people under the city were all deceived by me. They escorted me here. They are innocent. I hope your majesty will not pursue this matter and allow them to enter the city. Many scholars who heard Gong Yimo's name immediately thought of them. Some of them even shed tears, and some of them even shouted out. Princess is benevolent and righteous. We are willing to follow you. We pledge our lives to follow you. Gong Yimo smiled with relief, but didn't look at them. Gong Qing nodded, indicating that he agreed. With his nod, even if some ministers were afraid that Gong Yimo would kill their way in, the city gate was opened. The common people who were tired from the journey could finally enter the city to rest. But they were silent. No one expressed happiness, and no one wanted to resist Gong Yimo at this time. Seeing that the common people could enter the city, Gong Yimo breathed a sigh of relief and smiled slightly. Second wish. Now that the Crown Prince's life and death are unknown, I hope that Imperial Father can release the Empress to take care of him. Moreover, I hope that Imperial Father can recognize the Crown Prince's contribution and return the honor he deserves to him. Thinking of the child he used to threaten Gong Yimo, Gong Qing felt ashamed. As a father, he could be ruthless, but as a sister, Gong Yimo could do so much for him. Gong Che may be unfortunate, but because of Gong Yimo, how lucky was he? So he nodded and agreed to the second request. Gong Yimo smiled. Her pale little face was bloodless. Just a few days ago, she spat out the blood in her heart, but now she is still holding on for the safety of others. The third thing. Gong Ju is innocent. He has been alone since childhood, and I have been the only one who has taken care of him. In the future, I hope that Father Emperor can take over this responsibility and not let him be alone again. Gong Qing nodded heavily, but after he nodded, he immediately felt that something was wrong. Chapter 104. No, he had long sensed it. Gong Yimo is such a smart person, how can she not understand what he is worried about? After saying the three wishes, Gong Yimo finally looks up to the sky and smiles. Her smile is so clean and relaxed, as if a heavy burden has been lifted from her heart. Her whole person is light and flying. Suddenly, an explosion sounds from inside the ship. Amidst everyone's exclamation, Gong Yimo does not seem to hear the noise. Her finger slowly traces the carvings on the railing in front of her. After a long time, she suddenly looks up and smiles slyly at Emperor Gong. Father, do you know? This ship was originally meant to be your birthday gift. But I don't want to give it to you now. Emperor Gong seems to suddenly wake up. But it's too late for regrets. The entire ship explodes one after another and collapses inch by inch. Where the fire appears, the flood floods the sky. No one knows how many bombs are installed, but the explosion sounds are incessant. In the end, the entire ship is covered in fire and is burning fiercely. The fire soars into the sky, almost illuminating the entire sky. After the last earth-shattering explosion, the entire ship suddenly flips over and gradually sinks. No. No. Inside the city are the frightened voices of the people, but outside the city is hell on earth. Everywhere is flying sand and rolling stones, fire and smoke. Both sides of the river are affected, and there are big and small holes in the ground. It really confirms Li Ke's words, the power to break mountains and rivers, make the sun and moon lose their color. Emperor Gong's eyes are about to burst. His whole body is trembling. No. No, no, just now, he did not want Gong Yimo to die, he just does not trust her. He has not thought of what to do, but he will definitely not force her to die for that thing. He did not. Changshi. Quickly go and save her. Quickly go and save my daughter. In a panic, he forgot to address him as Emperor. Changshi quickly kneels on the ground and laments, "Your Majesty, restrain your grief. With such power, the princess must have." Bastard! Emperor Gong suddenly grabs his collar and lifts him up. "Who did you say died? Who did you say died? I'll let you go." Scram! Frightened by such a violent emperor, Changshi did not have time to mourn. He hurriedly went down the city, ordered people to open the city gates, and rushed into the flames to search. When the city gates opened, the panicked commoners rushed out to take a look, only to see that only half of the exquisite ship was left. Broken wood and flames were everywhere, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. The entire sky had turned gray, and that proud and upright figure could no longer be seen between heaven and earth. It was unknown who shouted this. The princess committed suicide. This sound was like a chain reaction, and cries could be heard from both inside and outside the city. A dignified man actually shed tears of grief over a woman's suicide. The entire city was in mourning, and the cries of mourning shook the heavens. No wonder the princess wanted them to go to the capital. It turned out that the princess already had the will to die at that time. The cries seemed to be contagious. Many people in the capital heard that Gong Yimo had died, and there were so many people crying for her. For some reason, they also felt sad. They could not help but recall how good the princess was. She was so young, but she had done so many things. Now, she was even forced to commit suicide. A feeling of sympathy for the death of a rabbit pervaded the capital. For a whole 7 days, the capital was in a state of depression. There were students who jointly wrote a eulogy for the princess, and there were also people who insisted that the princess was not dead. They searched day and night in Longting River for her body. That kind of power was enough to destroy a world-shocking ship. They were afraid that even the body of that little person would not be left behind. After the emperor returned to the palace, he did not regain his senses for 3 days. When he regained his senses, he issued 3 imperial edicts. The first was to restore the empress's power as the head of the palace. When the empress came out of the sacred Buddha temple, she did not know what had happened. The second was to send elites to help Jinshi of Gojoseon find Gong Dai. Actually, he was not as cruel as he said. After all, he had silently allowed Jinshi of Gojoseon to use most of his troops to find Gong Dai. The last imperial edict was the one that really caused a huge uproar. He did not give any reward to Gong Che. There was only one sentence in the imperial edict. The position of the crown prince is well deserved. This was recognition of Gong Che's position as the crown prince. Then, did the others still have a chance? Long Xiangxiang almost ground her teeth to pieces. That little bitch. That little bitch. So what if she's dead? She still has so many things to do. Who is Gong Che to her? Is he worth her doing this? Really? I'm so angry. I should have poisoned her in the cold palace back then. No matter how she thought about it, she could not accept it. Her beautiful face became distorted. For that cauldron, to deceive the emperor, how much effort did they put in? How much money and resources did they spend? Originally, they thought that after the crown prince returned to the capital, they would add fuel to the fire and execute him for the crime of treason. Then, she would let her son take charge of the remaining canal project. It would be effortless for her to obtain unparalleled merit. Moreover, they could also force Gong Yimo to hand over the mysterious weapon. Even if they could not get it, they could use the emperor to get rid of her. But all of this was ruined by Gong Yimo's suicide. They had sacrificed so much, but they did not get anything. Instead, because of Gong Yimo's death, Gong Che's position as the crown prince was established. How could they not be angry? They were about to explode from anger. At this time, a young man smiled coldly and comforted her in a low voice. Mother, don't be angry. At least we got rid of Gong Yimo, didn't we? Without her, wouldn't it be easy to deal with Gong Che? My benevolent and righteous crown prince brother is not as cunning as Gong Yimo. Her son's words finally made imperial concubine Long feel a little better, but she was still depressed. However, looking at her son in front of her, she was still gratified. Forget it, you're right. Now, since the crown prince is injured, you have to seize the opportunity to take over the canal project. The man smiled gloomily. His feminine eyes were stunningly beautiful. Understood. Mother. The Empress had lived in the sacred Buddha temple for more than a year. During this time, it could be said that all of her sharp edges had been smoothed out. After coming out, she was at a loss. But when she saw her seriously injured son, her eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Her heart ached, but her fighting spirit was ignited again. She took care of Gong Che day and night without letting anyone else do anything. Finally, after 7 days, Gong Che woke up. He was very weak, but the imperial physician said that as long as Gong Che woke up, there would be no problem. In a daze, Gong Che actually felt at ease. He could feel that Gong Yimo was always watching over him. But suddenly, one day, that feeling disappeared. He wanted to open his eyes but couldn't. Now that he woke up, no matter where he was, he first went to find Gong Yimo. But the first thing he saw was his mother. Mother. Empress. He didn't speak for a long time. His voice was hoarse and weak, but Empress Lu heard it immediately. She woke up and saw that her son was awake. She immediately cried tears of joy. Che! You're finally awake. Someone come. Imperial physician. Quickly call the imperial physician. After a while, Gong Che finally sat up after washing up. However, he was still very weak. The Empress fed him some medicine while telling him what happened after he fainted. Chapter 105. Actually, the Empress herself wasn't very clear. She had only heard it from the Lu family after they had taken her out. But she was very clear that there were some things that she definitely couldn't let her son know at this time. Otherwise, with his current body, he wouldn't be able to take it. She first said some good things. For example, the matter of him being framed had been cleared. The emperor pitied his heavy injuries, so she was also released from the sacred Buddha temple. Also, the main branch of the Grand Canal had been opened and so on, but even if she picked out some unimportant things to say, it was still very dangerous. When Gong Che heard that he was escorted by Gong Yimo all the way from the Huai River to the capital, he couldn't help but ask joyfully. Imperial Mother, where's Imo, why isn't she here? Was she too tired? But didn't they say that they had already been back for 7 days? The Empress didn't know what to say. After all, this matter was so big that it couldn't be hidden. But she didn't dare to say it. She mumbled a few words and said that Gong Yimo had left the palace. Then, she excused herself and left with an excuse. Another person came to serve him. This person was one of the Empress's older confidants. She was called Shui Xian. She walked in quietly with her head lowered. She didn't dare to look at Gong Che's eyes and only dared to lower her head to feed him medicine. At this time, Gong Che suddenly smiled. He was born handsome and gentle. His smile actually stunned the people who looked at him. Aunt Shui Xian, Imperial Mother, said that the princess is with Imperial Father. Why didn't she come to see me? When he said this, Shui Xian was stunned. She didn't even know that the soup in her spoon spilled out. There were some fine wrinkles on her face. Usually, they weren't obvious, but when she frowned, they were all exposed. Gong Che didn't seem to see her abnormal expression and smiled again. I feel very energetic now. Aunt Shui Xian, can you call her over for me? He really wanted to see her. But once he finished speaking, Shui Xian hurriedly hugged the soup bowl and knelt down. Her entire body was trembling because she really didn't know what the Empress had said to the Crown Prince. She could only keep quiet, afraid that she would say something wrong. Her actions made Gong Che's heart sink. He seemed to have a premonition, but he didn't dare to think too much about it. His face paled as he forced a smile and said, "What is Aunt Narcissus doing? Where's Immerse?" He said the last few words very softly, his voice trembling slightly. Meanwhile, Water Deity's entire body was stretched taut as a thin layer of sweat seeped out of her forehead. She knelt there helplessly, not knowing what to say. If she were to tell the truth, she was afraid that Gong Che's body would not be able to take it if he found out. If that happened, she would not be able to absolve herself from the blame even if she were to die 10,000 times. "Aunt, what are you doing?" Gong Che could no longer maintain his smile as he enunciated each and every word. "Where's Immerse?" After a while, Water Deity said in a low voice, "This servant doesn't know." Gong Che seemed to heave a sigh of relief and smiled. "Aunt, quickly get up. Look at you, I didn't ask you where Immerse is. Those who don't know are not guilty. Why are you so nervous?" Water Deity was about to cry. At this moment, the very worried Empress still came back. She couldn't help but sigh when she saw this and waved her hand to dismiss Water Deity. Water Deity hurriedly retreated as if she had been pardoned. Gong Che looked deeply at his Empress Mother, as if he wanted to see through all of her dodging and helplessness. "Empress Mother, what's wrong with Aunt Narcissus? I only asked her to pass on a message. Why is she so scared?" Empress Lu looked sorrowful when she heard this. She sat at Gong Che's bedside and thought for a while. Her mouth moved a few times as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she only sighed. "Son, if Empress Mother tells you everything, you must promise Empress Mother that you must be well." Her words were like a warning bell to Gong Che. Gong Che forced a smile. "Empress Mother, what are you talking about?" "I don't understand." Empress Lu's expression suddenly turned serious as she stared at him. "Che. Gong Yimo, she's already dead." As if he was hallucinating, Gong Che felt his ears were buzzing. What was Empress Mother saying? He must have heard wrongly. How could something happen to Immerse? "Empress Mother, what did you say?" Empress Lu saw Gong Che's face suddenly turn pale. She gritted her teeth and finally steeled her heart. Just as she was about to speak, Gong Che suddenly interrupted her. "Empress Mother." His lips trembled as he looked earnestly at the Empress. It was as if as long as the Empress didn't say those words, it would be as if nothing had happened. How could it be? How could something happen to Gong Yimo? She was Gong Yimo. The Empress couldn't help but cry. She was also very grateful to Gong Yimo for all that she had done for Che. But it was too late to say anything now. She was already dead. Therefore, she resolutely told him everything that had happened. Including Li Ke's betrayal, Gong Yimo being threatened by the Emperor for him, and being forced to spit out blood. Including how she had spent so much effort to open up the Grand Canal so that he could safely return to the capital. Including how she had argued with the Emperor to clear his name, including how she had refused to hand over the weapon in her hand, and her last 3 requests and finally dying. She spoke so slowly and so clearly. She hoped that Gong Che would recognize reality. It was better to end the pain quickly than to prolong the pain. But Gong Che, he only felt as if his entire body was empty, as if when the Empress said she was dead, his entire body also died. When he came back to his senses, he felt as if he had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. 10,000 pieces. Every time it shattered, it was a heart-wrenching pain. Gong Yimo. The woman he loved the most. How could she die? How could she die? The suffocating feeling appeared again. The Empress was shocked. She quickly gave Gong Che the medicine that he had been taking for a long time. She loudly shouted for her trusted imperial physician to come. Gong Che, he seemed to be having a relapse. Gong Che didn't know how much medicine he had taken, but it didn't work. He clutched his chest tightly and gasped as if he couldn't breathe. When the imperial physician came, Gong Che only said that his chest hurt so much that he couldn't breathe. But after the imperial physician examined him, Gong Che didn't have a relapse at all, so he didn't feel physical pain, but psychological pain. The imperial physician shook his head, and the Empress was even more regretful. She hugged Gong Che and cried, "Don't worry. Che. Nothing can happen to you. What should I do if something happens to you?" But Gong Che couldn't hear anything. He was trembling all over and curled up on the bed. He couldn't feel the Empress's heart-wrenching cries, nor could he hear the sounds of people falling off their horses in Phoenix Perch Palace. He only felt as if his heart was being tightly grasped by a pair of hands. Tightly clenched. He couldn't breathe. He was about to die. But why did he feel so terrible before he died? His mind was filled with images of her, but she wasn't by his side. Why? Gong Che regretted. He regretted that he didn't express his feelings. He regretted that his beloved was dead. She still didn't know his feelings. He didn't want to be her brother. He wasn't her brother. He wanted to be her man. Even if she hated him, he should tell her about his feelings. Ah. Gong Yimo, where are you? Where are you? Chapter 106. As if she was woken up by someone, Gong Yimo opened her eyes and found herself in a very beautiful room. It was also very warm, but she didn't know how long she had slept. "You're awake." A surprised voice sounded and Gong Yimo turned her head to look. It was actually someone she knew. Shen. Shi. She opened her mouth and wanted to smile, but her whole body was sore and she frowned. Shen Shi let out a long sigh of relief. His beautiful eyes were dim because he hadn't rested for a long time, but at this time, they were bright again. Thank the heavens. This young master was really afraid that you would die just like that. It was easy to say, but at that time, it was unknown who led 1,000 people to search for her in Longting River. Finally, the heavens didn't disappoint those who were willing. He beat everyone else and found her in a remote river. At that time, she was lying in a huge dragon head carved out of wood. The dragon head had already cracked and she was lying in it. Her whole body was soaked and she was so weak that it made one's heart ache. Gong Yimo sat up and patted her head. At the last moment of the explosion, she took out the dragon head that was originally going to be installed on the bow of the ship and hid in it. Thank the heavens, there was a gap in the middle of the dragon head that was used for installation. It was just enough for her to hide. Because of the violent vibration and collision, she fainted and the wooden dragon head went all the way down with the flow of water, avoiding the sight of many people. Gong Yimo felt for a moment. Because of the collision, she suffered internal injuries. The external injuries were nothing. This kind of state made her sigh in relief. After a while, she suddenly raised her head and asked anxiously, "How long have I been unconscious?" Shen Shi yawned, 7 days. And he also stayed by her side for 7 days, damn. It's over. Gong Yimo quickly got up. As she put on her clothes, she grimaced in pain because of her internal injuries. Yi glared. What are you doing? Do you know how much effort this young master spent to save you? Where are you going? Gong Yimo treated him as a friend, so naturally, she didn't hide it from him. Gong Dai is now in deep danger. Although the emperor might have already sent people to look for him, I'm still worried. I'm going to find him myself. Hearing that Gong Yimo was worried about someone else as soon as she woke up, Yi became angry and frowned. Don't go. His voice was very loud. Seeing Gong Yimo stop and look at him in confusion, Yi frowned. Do you know how serious your injuries are? You're going to save people like this. You're clearly going to die. If it were any other matter, there would still be room for discussion, but this matter was absolutely out of the question. Gong Yimo was silent for a moment before she raised her head and looked at him sternly. She said word by word, "That's my family. I have to go." The word family left Yi speechless. He was so angry that his jade face turned red. He knew that he couldn't stop Gong Yimo, so after a long time, he couldn't help but mutter in frustration. Can't you take a breather? He's already so old, what problems can there be? Gong Emo smiled when she heard this. Gong Dai was raised by me, so I naturally know what he's capable of. Even if he's in danger, he'll be fine. Then why are you still going? Because I'm worried about him. After Gong Yimo finished speaking, she had already put on her clothes. She bowed deeply to Yi and said gratefully, "Many thanks to heir apparent for saving me. I can't express my gratitude with words. Allow me to repay you when I return." Yi snorted in annoyance and didn't even bother to look at her. Who wants you to repay me? Although he said that, he still felt a little depressed and disappointed. Gong Yimo rubbed her nose and said embarrassedly, "That. I still have a request." Yi rolled his eyes at the sky. "Just say it. You're not the kind of person to be shy." Gong Yimo laughed mischievously. "If there's a chance, help me tell the crown prince that I'm safe." Yi was silent for a moment, then he looked at her with a complicated expression and suddenly said, "Don't tell me you don't have yourself in your heart." Yi saw that she was looking at him with a blank expression and suddenly became angry. If it's not Gong Dai, then it's Gong Che, or it's some commoner. Common people of the world, you're a woman. Don't tell me you don't have yourself in your heart. You have to know that you just walked through the gates of hell. How can you act as if nothing happened and go save people? Yi angrily closed his mouth. No matter what Gong Yimo thought, he just couldn't let go of the anger in his heart. He was angry for her, complaining about her injustice, and worried for her, but she didn't seem to mind at all. She acted as if nothing had happened. It made him seem like he was meddling in other people's business. Gong Yimo looked at Ye's red face and suddenly laughed. This awkward heir apparent was worried about her, right? "You care about me," she said proudly, but Ye's handsome face turned red when he heard this. He glared at her fiercely with his bright eyes. "You're thinking too much. I don't care about you." Gong Yimo shrugged. If he didn't care, then he didn't care. In any case, she didn't really care about these things. But seeing her indifferent appearance, Yi became even angrier. He turned his head and didn't want to pay attention to her. "That's right, are you already the Imperial Left Guard?" "That's right, if it wasn't so, how could he be the first one to find her?" Yi was still angry at first, but when he heard her question, he felt a little embarrassed. He looked away and responded with a grumpy voice. "So what if I am?" Gong Yimo smiled and walked forward. Her sudden approach made Yi nervous for some reason. He saw her take out something from her chest and stuff it into Ye's hand. "Since it's like this, I can't go back on my word on the gift. After forcing it into his hand, she took a step back and bowed again. In short, we'll meet again when I return to the capital. Don't forget the matter that I asked you to do. After she finished speaking, she made a playful face and turned around to run away. She was like this. She seemed to be easy to talk to, but in fact, once she decided on something, she would never change her mind. Shinshiryi wanted to call her, but he didn't know what reason to make her stay. He could only sulk and scold this little ingrate. His eyes couldn't help but look at the gift that the other party prepared for him. With one look, he was angry and happy. Gong Yimo actually carved a cute version of Shinshiryi. That angry face, the bulging cross-shaped mark on the corner of his forehead, and his big eyes seemed to be glaring at someone. It was very funny. Shinshiryi couldn't wait to throw this thing away. It was really too embarrassing. But when he thought about how Gong Yimo had personally carved him, he couldn't bear to part with it. Did Gong Yimo know the meaning of carving a male figurine and then giving it to someone else? So in Gong Yimo's eyes, a dignified and handsome heir like him actually had this kind of image. But no matter what he thought, Gong Yimo had already walked far away. Chapter 107. A fast horse headed west. Thinking of the child she had raised, Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with a hint of determination. Wait for me. The barren miasma plains was a very strange place. There weren't many trees here. Even if there were animals, they were extremely ferocious. Ferocious beasts appeared in packs. The ground was covered in withered yellow grass, and there were no other colors. Occasionally, there would be different plants that might be highly poisonous. The sky was misty, and it was almost impossible to see the sun. During the day, the fog was white, but at night, the fog would be mixed with a touch of faint green. Other than when it was snowing or raining, staying here for a long time would cause people to faint, be exhausted, and hallucinate. Therefore, even eagles would take a detour to avoid this place. Gong Dai carefully searched the corpses. For the past 10 days, the direction of Lu Yi had been blocked by the army, and from time to time, men of sacrifice would be sent in to search. In the direction of Dai Yu State, there was an insurmountable snowy mountain. If he wanted to leave, he could only break through Lu Ye's encirclement. Gong Dai had used this period of time to familiarize himself with the barren miasma plains to kill these people. He hadn't eaten for 2 or 3 days. Finally, he found half a bag of wine and a piece of dry food on one of the people's wastes. It seemed like these people were like him. They hadn't eaten for a long time. Gong Dai swallowed slowly, taking small bites very carefully. His experience in the cold palace when he was young told him that eating like this could increase the feeling of fullness, and he wouldn't have abdominal pain if he ate too quickly. He had been wandering around the edge of the plains for a long time. Because of Lu Ye's army, there was almost no way to break through. They were also anxious and wouldn't stop until they caught him. However, Gong Dai knew that they didn't have much food left, especially now that it had snowed once or twice. The animals had all disappeared. At most, in a few more days, the 200,000 soldiers would either take the risk to go to the border cities of Dai Yu State or retreat. Now that his grandfather had taken precautions, it was meaningless for them to attack again. Therefore, in at most 10 days, they would retreat. Perhaps they were already retreating by now. However, these 10 days were not easy for him. There was almost no food or water here. Even if they dug holes for water, they wouldn't be able to accumulate much water every day, let alone food. Even the grass roots had no nutrients at this time, and the only animals found here were packs of wild wolves. It was impossible to catch them. How was he going to spend the next 10 days? His cold eyes couldn't help but look at the dozen or so corpses on the ground, revealing a thoughtful expression. The crown prince was critically ill, and the emperor had bestowed countless precious medicines to him, but they were all useless. He vomited almost everything he ate, and medicine was useless. Gong Che clearly knew that he shouldn't be like this. It wasn't his husband's doing, but he couldn't control his body. He couldn't digest the food he ate, and in just a few days, he became shockingly thin. When Shen Shiyi asked to see the crown prince, Empress Lu completely disregarded her manners. Like a trapped beast, she refused to let anyone near her. Shen Shiyi had no choice but to say that he had a way to save the crown prince. Only then was he able to enter the Eastern Palace, dismiss everyone, and meet Gong Che alone. At this time, his face was even paler than when he first returned to the capital. His entire body was frighteningly thin. He lay on the bed, motionless, as if he was already dead. Shen Shiyi snorted, and his slightly arrogant voice echoed in the empty room. "Who are you doing this for?" Gong Che didn't move at all, as if he didn't hear. Shen Shiyi snorted disdainfully. If Gong Yimo saw that the crown prince she worked so hard to save was such a useless person, I don't know how angry she would be. Gong Che's eyes seemed to move, but he still didn't have any consciousness. Shen Shiyi simply sat on the bed and sneered, "Speaking of which, you being able to sit on the crown prince's seat now is because of her painstaking efforts. But with your virtue, I really feel that her sacrifice wasn't worth it." He had already said this, but Gong Che still didn't move at all. Shen Shiyi was a little annoyed. He stood up and prepared to leave. He really didn't want to tell Gong Che that Gong Yimo was still alive. It might be a little cruel, but wasn't it just the death of his younger sister? Why did he have to make it seem like she was dying for love? He took a few steps, but there was still no movement behind him. He couldn't help but grit his teeth, when he thought about how if Gong Che really died like this, he didn't know how Gong Yimo would blame him when she returned. So even if he was unwilling, he still whispered a sentence. "All right, don't play dead. Gong Yimo isn't dead. It's just that she was in a hurry to save people and is now rushing to the West Province. You also don't play dead here." His words seemed to be more effective than any miraculous elixir. Gong Che suddenly opened his eyes. What did you say?" His voice was so hoarse, but it was full of disbelief. Shen Shiyi's expression was complicated for a moment, but he didn't turn around. "I said, she's not dead. I personally fished her out of the river. It was also she who wanted me to tell you. Otherwise, who would care if you were dead or alive?" After saying this, Shen Shiyi didn't care where the little bitterness in his heart came from. He strode away, leaving Gong Che lying on the ground in shock. His heart was full of disbelief. Gong Yimo was still alive. Thump thump. At this moment, he felt as if his heart had also skipped a beat. She was still alive. Shen Shiyi wouldn't lie to him. He disdained lying, so this was true. Mo was still alive. As soon as Shen Shiyi left, Empress Lu hurried in. When she came in, she saw that Gong Che had indeed opened his eyes. She was overjoyed. "Che! You're finally awake. You're finally awake." "Mother," Gong Che was very ashamed. He didn't want it to be like this, but at that time, when he heard the news of Gong Yimo's death, he couldn't control his body's weakness. It was as if her death meant that his life was also cut off. His poor mother, who was worried about him every day and cried. Empress Lu just gently hugged him, afraid to use any strength. She hugged him as if she was holding a rare treasure. "It's good that you're awake, it's good that you're awake. Che!" The Empress's face was full of tears, but she was so happy that she cried. She hugged him for a while, then as if she remembered something, she quickly called for someone to bring in ginseng tea and medicine. This time, Gong Che finally ate it, and there was a trace of color on his face. As he drank the medicine, he asked the Empress to tell him in detail what happened after he fainted. Last time, when he heard that Gong Yimo was dead, he had a relapse. As for what happened after that, he didn't know. Empress Lu didn't dare to hide anything from him, so she quickly told him everything. Fortunately, other than Gong Yimo's matter, everything else was good. She was released at Gong Yimo's request. The emperor also recognized him as the crown prince because of Gong Yimo's pleas. It could be said that Gong Yimo had helped them countless times, so when Empress Lu said this, she was full of gratitude. Chapter 108. But when she changed the topic, she hesitated. Gong Che saw this and knew that something must have happened, so he let her speak. Empress Lu gritted her teeth and said angrily, Long Xiangxiang, that bitch, actually sent someone to report that Che is not in good health, and the canal can't be delayed. She wants someone else to take charge and build the canal. She said coldly, that's a good idea. Now that the main road has been built, it's just the work of repairing the dam and digging the tributaries. 2 years is enough. She wanted to secretly recommend her son, but because of Lu Xianfei's interference yesterday, it didn't happen. These were all her son's efforts. Those people saw that there was profit to be made and came to snatch it. Not only did they cause her son to lie in bed, but they also wanted to replace him. How shameless. It's a pity that Lu family is weak, and she just came out of the sacred Buddha temple, otherwise she wouldn't be so passive. But strangely, after hearing the Empress's angry words, Gong Che's expression didn't change at all, as if he didn't care. The Empress thought that Gong Che was angry and worried that something bad would happen. She quickly suppressed her anger and comforted him. Don't worry, my son. Mother won't let them succeed like this. Now that His Majesty has recognized you as the Crown Prince, in a short time, they can't suppress you. However, what Gong Che wanted was not only to suppress. This time, when he was critically ill, it was as if something awakened in his body. If he only wanted to do good for the country and the people before, he wanted to protect the people around him and not let them down. But now, he has a clearer goal. Gong Che put down the bowl. After drinking a bowl of medicine, his spirit was obviously better. But because he was scarily thin and his face was pale, it was very scary. He got up and looked like he wanted to get out of bed. Che, what are you doing? The Empress was very strange, but she quickly went to help him. Mother, I want to go to Zhaoyang Hall. Empress Lu was shocked. Why are you going to Zhaoyang Hall like this? Gong Che smiled faintly, but not as gentle as before. His smile was cold and gloomy. Since it's mine, no one else is qualified to snatch it. He looked out of the hall and muttered softly. If it's mine, I'll take it back. Gong Cheng was not in good spirits during this period of time. He was anxious, and almost everyone was in danger. At this moment, Changshi stepped forward and whispered, Your Majesty, the Crown Prince is here. Gong Cheng's hand, which was practicing calligraphy, paused. Didn't he just wake up? What are you doing here? Let him go back and recuperate. Changshi was a little embarrassed. But, the Crown Prince knelt outside the hall and said that if Your Majesty doesn't see him, he won't get up. Gong Ching frowned and threw the brush on the table. He was so angry that he laughed. Good, this one by one, I want to see what he wants to do. After that, he strode out, and Changshi hurriedly followed. The weather was rather gloomy, as if a heavy rain was brewing. The skinny Gong Che knelt on the bluestone slab, his entire body stiff and straight. Initially, Gong Cheng had a belly full of anger because of his depression, but the moment he saw Gong Che, most of his anger dissipated. He couldn't help but think of that child. That child used his life to save his child. As a father, what qualifications did he have to give this child a hard time? Moreover, Gong Che's current appearance was indeed frightening. There was no trace of his previous handsomeness. Gong Qing knew the reason for Gong Chei's illness this time was because of that child's death. It was just that he didn't salvage the child's body, so he stubbornly believed that Gong Yimou wasn't dead. But Gong Chei was different. He became like this in just a few days. It was clear that he believed it and was extremely sorrowful. Gong Qing couldn't help but sigh in his heart. They weren't siblings, but they were more like siblings. "What are you doing here?" His tone was faint, revealing his exhaustion. Gong Chei looked at the high and mighty emperor. His eyes flashed with a light that only he understood. He kowtowed deeply and said, "I beg Imperial Father to dismiss this son from the position of the Eastern Palace." His words were like a clap of thunder that stunned Gong Qing. He frowned and waved everyone present to withdraw. He looked at the Crown Prince solemnly. "Why? Do you know that you can stay here alive?" "It's her." Gong Qing wanted to say that she exchanged her life for it. "That's exactly why." Gong Chei suddenly raised his head. His eyes were red and filled with tears as he looked straight at the emperor. "That's exactly why. The position of Crown Prince was stained with Imperial Sister's blood. It's fine if you don't want it." His words made Gong Cheng's heart ache. He had always refused to admit that Gong Yimou was dead. After all, there was no corpse. But some people said that perhaps the power of the poison was so great that her body had long been shattered and filled with the billowing dragon river. Gong Qing blinked for a long time before saying, "If you do this, her spirit in heaven will not rest in peace." "It doesn't matter." When Gong Chei said this, his heart was already dead. He smiled with a pale face. "Whether I'm the Crown Prince or not, Imperial Sister will not come back to life. But I have something to ask Imperial Father." Gong Qing sighed. "Say it." Gong Chei's face showed a trace of longing. The Grand Canal was Imperial Sister's idea. She was also the one who facilitated, planned, and built it. "I hope Imperial Father can send me to continue the construction of the canal." Imperial Sister's greatest wish was to push the tributary to the interior of Daiyu State, so that it could cross the east and west, strengthen trade and benefit the people. Now she's dead. The last word was almost inaudible. That slightly trembling ending sound made Gong Cheng's heart sour and he closed his eyes. Gong Chei forced himself to stay awake and said calmly and firmly, "Now that she's dead, I will fulfill her wish for her." Gong Chei bowed again and pleaded, "I beg Imperial Father to allow it." The emperor stood there for a long time before he slowly opened his eyes. "Your body. I'm afraid it won't allow. It's not a problem." Gong Chei directly raised his head and interrupted the emperor's words. His eyes were full of hope, as if they were bursting with infinite vitality. "No one knows better than me how she wants to build the next main road. No one knows better than me her intentions. She said that once the Grand Canal was completed, she wanted to secretly name it. She asked me to seek Imperial Father's approval. Now that she's gone, I will inherit the wish and name she left behind." Gong Qing couldn't help but ask, what name did she want to name it? Gong Chei paused after each word, Zetian Grand Canal. "Bless the people, the world is one family." "Good." Gong Qing suddenly clapped his hands and looked deeply at Gong Chei. "Good name, this will be the name. Zetian, Zetian, what a good meaning." He smiled and waved his hand tiredly. "I understand what you mean. Jin will continue to send you to build the canal, but there's no need to say more about the position of Crown Prince. You deserve it. I hope you take good care of yourself and return as soon as possible." Gong Chei was overjoyed. But his face was rather bleak as he kowtowed. "This son, thanks your majesty for your kindness." When Gong Chei returned to the Eastern Palace, Empress Lu was pacing back and forth, muttering to herself. When she saw Gong Chei, her eyes lit up. "Che! What are you going to do?" "Your imperial father, he." Gong Che waved his hand, indicating for her to be at ease. "Imperial father has given his permission. I will be fully responsible for supervising the construction of the Grand Canal." The Empress was overjoyed. Really? She only met the Emperor once, how could it have such a big effect? Gong Che smiled gently, "Really?" But for some reason, when she saw Gong Che's familiar smile, the Empress felt a trace of unfamiliarity. Her son seemed to have changed. At this time, Gong Che took the porridge from the palace servant and smiled as he ate. Because he was now too thin, his smile was a bit scary. Mo went to Shizhou, but he couldn't go with her. He had enough of this feeling of being controlled by others. He wanted to be strong, strong enough to do whatever he wanted. He swore that when Gong Yimo came back, he would be different. Chapter 109. The Barren Miasma Plains. Gong Dai saw Lu Ye's troops patrolling in the distance. He hid behind a huge rock and tore off a piece of meat with an expressionless face and put it into his mouth. He used the corpses of a dozen people as bait to hunt down a lone wolf. Wolf meat was really disgusting, but he couldn't seem to smell any fishy smell as he chewed. During this time, he saw many corpses. Some were from Daiyu State, and some were from Lu Yi. It seemed like everyone was looking for him. However, if the Daiyu State people wanted to come here, they had to break through Lu Ye's encirclement. Therefore, there were probably only a few Daiyu State people who came here alive. Gong Dai looked at the sky. It seemed like it was going to snow again. Every time it snowed, the miasma in the barren miasma plains would recede. That was when Lu Ye's men came in to search for him. The reason why Gong Dai wasn't affected by the miasma was that when he first came in, he was hallucinating because of the miasma. When he suddenly woke up, he found himself in a strange yellow flower bush. The yellow flower was the antidote. This was originally an advantage, but recently, it snowed more and more frequently. Without food, his situation became more and more dangerous. Another 7 days passed. Snowflakes fluttered in the sky. Gong Dai once again hid at the border of the barren miasma plains. He saw a group of people sitting anxiously in front of a bonfire not far away. The atmosphere was particularly depressing. "How long does the general want us to wait? It's just one person, and he wants us to surround him. If you ask me, that kid would have died in there long ago. There's no point in waiting like this." Another older man with a big beard comforted him. That kid could play around with more than 10,000 soldiers, kill the general, and burn the provisions. How could he die so easily? Don't let your guard down. If we make any more mistakes, we will all be killed by the general. That kid has the general's token. It's a disgrace if it falls into the hands of an outsider. We have to get it back. I wonder if the people who went in to search have found that kid. And the tokens they were talking about were actually tokens carved on bones. Every person of status had one and usually hung it around their neck. And Gong Dai could use the 3 tokens in his hand to claim credit from the emperor. This was irrefutable proof. Gong Dai silently looked at this group of people. His body seemed to have merged with the snow and the night, not moving at all. He had been observing for a few days. Other than them, there were 2 more checkpoints that they had to pass as they went further out. Therefore, it was unwise to alert the enemy now. But it was as if the heavens were helping him. Just as he was thinking that it would be great if someone could divert their attention, the sound of close combat could be heard from afar. Someone shouted from afar, "Catch her! Don't let her in!" When the people around the bonfire heard the noise, they immediately rushed over. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and looked at the group of people in front of him rushing towards that place. He thought to himself, perhaps they are people from Die You State again. Or perhaps this is a good opportunity to escape. There were only 2 guards behind him. Perhaps he could escape first and then blend in with the enemy. His figure approached like a fog. The darkness of the night was the best concealment. More and more people were running in that direction. Gong Dai smiled and quickly moved in the opposite direction. Before anyone discovered him, he had to leave this damned place and act according to the circumstances. As for the life and death of the person who came to save him. Since she came to save him, wasn't she worthy of dying for him? But before he could leave, he was stopped in his tracks by a loud laugh. Gong Yimo retreated and laughed at the people behind her. You guys are too slow. How are you going to catch me like this? Gong Dai's eyes stared into the dark night. The voice just now. The voice just now. Perhaps it was too much of a dream, but when it suddenly appeared, he was actually not sure. Gong Yimo ran deeper into the desolate miasma plains while thinking. Once she entered the depths of the desolate miasma plains, these people would definitely not dare to chase after her. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it would be. Who knew when the snow would stop? Once she was hit by the miasma, she would die. But she was not afraid. She still had a simple gas mask in her space. Therefore, she ran as fast as she could without any regard for her life, while provoking them mischievously. The reason why she could rush in so easily was because she used her naked body to attract their attention. Now, the bigger the commotion, the easier it would be for Gong Dai to notice her and discover her. As for fighting with them, who knew that Gong Yimo's internal injuries had not healed yet? Wouldn't fighting be asking for trouble? By the time she ran out of energy, she was already in the depths of the desolate miasma plains. Everywhere was pitch black. She turned around and saw that the people behind her were finally not chasing after her. She could not help but make a face at them proudly. But when she turned around, she fell into someone's arms, giving her a fright. She wanted to struggle, but that pair of hands was like an iron wall that held her tightly. The other party's head was deeply buried in her neck. His hot breath hit her neck. Before Gong Yimo could react, the other party's 2 words suppressed all her movements. Royal sister. Gong Yimo was stunned. At this moment, the snow was dancing and the world was silent. She could only hear the other party's rapid breathing. Is it Gong Dai? Gong Yimo asked carefully. In the darkness, she could not see clearly who was hugging her. Moreover, Gong Dai seemed to have passed the age of puberty. Now his voice sounded cold but lingering. It was as if thousands of words were contained in those 2 words. She did not get an answer because Gong Dai hugged her even tighter. That strong and powerful heartbeat. It fiercely hit her ear again and again. It really was Gong Dai. Gong Yimo quickly hugged him back. He had grown so tall, Gong Yimo couldn't help but take a deep breath. Great! She found him as soon as she arrived, and he looked fine. Nothing had happened to him at all. He really deserved to be the child she raised. At this moment, Gong Dai felt like he was dreaming. For so many days and nights, whether it was acting in front of others, carefully plotting and scheming, taking risks to spy on Lu Yi at night, or using tricks to burn the supplies, he was chased by the army several times. There were several times when he almost died. He could drink muddy water, eat bloody meat, and hold tightly onto the nameplates of the guards he had killed. All of this was so that he could go back and see her. It was so that he could have power, so that he could be at the top. It was so that he could never leave her side. And the person he thought about day and night, the person he could not sleep at night, was right in front of him. How he wanted to kiss her to fill his heart with the pain of yearning. He couldn't imagine how he had endured the past 500 days and nights without her. But it did not matter. She was in his arms, so real. The sweet fragrance on her body was exactly the same as the one he had smelled when he hugged her to sleep. However, his royal sister had grown up. She attracted him even more. After hugging for a while, even Gong Dai himself felt a little embarrassed. However, the person in his arms did not resist at all. He looked at her in surprise. Under the faint moonlight, Gong Yimo's little face was right in front of him. She was sleeping so soundly. Chapter 110. She was really tired. She had used Qinggong and galloped the entire way. She almost did not sleep at all. She was afraid that if she slept, she would wake up to the news of Gong Dai's death. Even if she believed in Gong Dai, she was still afraid and could not sleep at all. Now that she saw Gong Dai and hugged him, Gong Yimo could no longer resist the sleepiness and fell asleep. The surroundings were quiet, only the two of them were hugging each other in the endless snowy plains. Gong Dai's heart skipped a beat. He could not help but lower his head and gently kiss her forehead. He did not forget how dirty he was now. Fortunately, there was no smell, otherwise, he would be too ashamed to show his face. They could not stay in the plains at night for long. He was afraid that there would be ferocious beasts. He hurriedly carried Gong Yimo and walked to a place. Fortunately, he found the yellow flowers that could restrain the miasma. If they rested in a place with these flowers, they would not be affected by the miasma. Therefore, Gong Dai hurriedly took Gong Yimo and left this place. After walking for about 2 hours, he came to a pile of rocks. The yellow flowers grew in the cracks of the rocks. In the depths of the pile of rocks, there was a small cave. It was really small, only 2 meters high and 2 meters deep. It could not block the wind, but it could only shelter from the rain. This was a place he found by chance and rested. Gong Dai first carefully put her in, then used his fastest speed to pull some withered grass and spread it on the ground. Because it was snowing, although he shook off the snow, the grass was still moist and bone-chilling. How could Gong Yimo sleep? Gong Dai, who had never been troubled by any problems, looked at the pile of grass in front of him and hesitated. He always wanted to give Gong Yimo the best, no matter the environment. After thinking, he took off his coat and spread it on the grass pile. Then, he carried Gong Yimo up. Sleeping on the grass was better than sleeping on the ground. Gong Yimo lazily moved, but she didn't open her eyes. Gong Dai couldn't help but smile. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was very beautiful. It was as if the ice and snow had just melted, causing others to be alarmed. After doing this, he made another fire and went out to clean himself up with snow. He did it very slowly and meticulously. His movements were elegant and unhurried. He couldn't leave a bad impression in front of Gong Yimo. He wanted her to see the good in him. After cleaning up, when he came back, his body was already cold. He expelled the cold from his body by the bonfire, but his eyes could not help but stare at Gong Yimo. It really felt like a dream. Was he really not dreaming? A hint of confusion flashed through Gong Dai's eyes. Under the flickering light of the fire, Gong Yimo's little face was also bright red. She slept very soundly and peacefully. She didn't have to worry about anything by Gong Dai's side. He was someone she could completely entrust her back to. Gong Yimo smacked her lips in her sleep, then pouted and went back to sleep. Seeing this, Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh. He felt a wave of relief. How long had it been since he could quietly look at her like this? It had been so long that it felt like a lifetime ago. Gong Dai got up and slowly approached her. His body was still warm from the fire. He quietly slept next to Gong Yimo and looked at her up close. Gong Yimo was actually very beautiful, but her facial expressions were too rich. They changed like the wind at any time, making it difficult for people to quietly admire her appearance. Only when she didn't speak or move, that perfect and natural face would show its elegance. Especially when she didn't smile and quietly looked at you, just her pair of clear eyes that could contain everything was enough to make people fall in love with her. But when she closed her eyes, her entire face appeared quiet and gentle. However, when she slept, she would always frown slightly, as if there was an unresolvable sadness in her eyes. Gong Dai gently touched her forehead with his finger. This face had been depicted thousands of times in his heart. Her eyelashes had grown longer, her face had become whiter and more delicate, and her facial features had also gradually matured. There would be a day when no one would overlook her appearance no matter how witty she was. Because his royal sister had already become a beauty capable of causing the downfall of a city. Gong Dai was very glad that he didn't miss out on her today. Royal sister was here to save him. She rushed over from thousands of miles away. How could he miss out on her? It seemed like he was still number one in her heart. The next day, when Gong Yimo woke up, she found herself being hugged tightly. She tilted her head and saw Gong Dai, letting out a long sigh of relief. Thank goodness, thank goodness. She thought she was dreaming last night. Gong Dai was really fine, and he was alive and well by her side. Also, Gong Dai had changed. He was almost 13 years old. In fact, Gong Yimo was only 7 months older than Gong Dai, but the childishness in him seemed to have disappeared. His eyes were becoming more and more exquisite, and his appearance was becoming more and more devilish. He was also becoming more and more like the Prince Regent in the future. But no matter how much he changed, he was still the child that she raised. Gong Yimo was very satisfied. Under Gong Yimo's naked gaze, Gong Dai could no longer pretend to be asleep. He opened his eyes. Those eyes that were cold and emotionless in the eyes of his subordinates were so clean and cold in front of Gong Yimo. They were like sparkling snowflakes on a snowy mountain. Gong Yimo liked his eyes very much. They were pure black and white, just like black jade. That pair of eyes suddenly became helpless. Royal sister, Gong Yimo answered him verbally, but her little hand was happily pinching Gong Dai's face. She laughed and said, "Did you not eat properly? Look at how skinny you are, there's no meat left." But in her heart, she was praising him. It felt so good to the touch. Even the wind and sand in Shi province couldn't make his skin rough. Gong Dai helplessly held her hand and took it down. He looked at her intently and smiled. "Why is royal sister here?" Gong Yimo laughed heartlessly. "To save you, of course." Her thinking made Gong Dai feel rather helpless. "Royal sister. I'm not a child anymore." Didn't she see that his hand was already big enough to completely wrap around Gong Yimo's hand? Gong Yimo laughed. "In my eyes, you'll always be a child." She could finally say such things to someone with a loving face. What a sense of accomplishment. Gong Dai laughed with her, but he squeezed her hand tightly and sighed in a very, very low voice. "You'll know that I've grown up." Gong Yimo was confused by his words. Then she realized that the two of them were still hugging each other. This didn't seem right. Gong Yimo wanted to get up, but Gong Dai pressed her down and said coquettishly, "It's cold outside, and how long has it been since we last met? Let's talk." Gong Emo helplessly shook her head and continued to lie down. But now she felt strange. Her back was against the wall, while Gong Ju was hugging her and squeezing her very close to the wall. There was a faint smell of snow on him, and it was very cold. But his breath was scorching hot, and the small space suddenly became hot. Chapter 111. Why are you leaning so close to me? Gong Yimo asked seriously. Gong Dai rested his head gently on her neck and said softly. Because I'm cold. Royal sister. Gong Yimo was speechless. She tilted her head and saw that it was indeed snowing outside. There was even a cold wind blowing. This time, she was speechless. However, her body could not help but tense up. She did not know why, but she felt that Gong Dai was a little strange this time. However, she quickly thought that perhaps it was because they had not seen each other for too long that he was so clingy. At this moment, Gong Dai was feeling both sweet and painful. The sweet thing was that he could get close to Gong Yimo without any fear. He could hug her to sleep and smell the sweet scent of sugar on her body. Unfortunately, he could only get these as a child. However, he was no longer a child. In the past year, he had often mingled with the soldiers and listened to them reminiscing about their wives at home. Then, they would talk about some dirty jokes. In his heart, there would be uncontrollable fantasies. Moreover, the person that he had been thinking about day and night was in his arms. Gong Dai's hands tightened little by little. He could not help but rub against Gong Yimo's body. He did not know what he wanted, but rubbing against her like this made him feel strangely comfortable. However, he was also alert at all times. He tried his best to act coquettishly. He knew that Gong Yimo loved it when he acted coquettishly or made cute expressions. She would not doubt him at all and would even be satisfied. But, why was it not enough for him to hug her? Did he want more? Gong Dai's body was tense as he restrained himself. He tried his best to ask in a calm tone. Will royal sister still leave? He was just asking casually. No matter what, he would keep her by his side when she came. However, Gong Yimo simply stroked his long hair and smiled. I'm not leaving. You don't have to dig the canal anymore. Let's build the canal together. Gong Dai looked up happily. Are you serious? He could not help but smile. His face had become more and more exquisite, and this smile was simply too beautiful. Gong Yimo covered her little heart. Good girl, it's better if you smile less in the future. Your smile is going to steal people's souls. It would be great if she could really seduce him. Although he knew that she was joking, Gong Dai was still elated when he heard her words. He smiled faintly. His snow-white inner robe set off his jade-like face. He was so close that it seemed as if he could really steal her soul. Gong Yimo was stunned for a moment before she said. I'm really not leaving this time. Beijing is not fun at all. Now, there are so many open and covert struggles. Let's just hide here and go back later when you grow up. You can get married. I want to marry the best girl in Dayu State for you. The best in Dayu State, isn't that you? Gong Dai looked at her and smiled. No, his royal sister was the best in the world. It's great that she's not leaving. They'll stay here and no one will come and snatch her away. He had enough time to move his royal sister. One day, even his royal sister would accept him. Then, they would never go back. As long as she was with him. Gong Dai did not care if he was a prince or a commoner. As long as he had her, they could go sightseeing in the day and have sex at night. That was his greatest ambition in life. Gong Yimo naturally did not notice his little scheme. After they talked about who she belonged to, she had to think about how to get out of here. After all, Junshi of Gojoseon had sent many people to search for her. As long as they did not show up, many people would die. Gong Yimo's idea was actually very simple. She would attract the enemy's attention while Gong Dai would leave first. Then, he would find someone to save her. However, this idea was strongly opposed by Gong Dai. She could only give up and think of another way. Actually, it was not easy for them to leave. The desolate miasma plain was so big and it was getting colder. Lu Yi must have withdrawn a lot of his troops. It was impossible for him to block every exit. Moreover, there were only 2 of them. They were a small target and would not be a big problem. After thinking it through, Gong Yimo sat up and crawled to the fire. There was a piece of meat roasting over the fire. It did not smell good, but it was cleaned very well. Seeing Gong Yimo staring at it, Gong Dai came over and took the meat. He said awkwardly, "There's no other food here, only wolf meat. Royal sister, please bear with it, you've been eating this all this time." Gong Yimo frowned slightly. She could not help but feel sorry for him. When she raised him, even when he was in the cold palace, he was served with delicious fish and meat. Although his food was not exquisite, it was definitely not bad. However, she did not expect him to stay here for more than 10 days. Not to mention the danger, he could only eat this kind of food. Gong Dai would definitely not tell her that at the beginning, he ate grass roots and drank mud and snow water. His royal sister was good at everything, but she liked to make him look weak. It was as if he was always a child who needed her protection. Gong Yimo was very conflicted. She had a lot of food in her space, but she did not bring a package when she came here. How could she explain it to him? She frowned and dug in her clothes with one hand. Finally, she took out a meat patty. This meat patty was bought on the way here. It was the right size. She should not be suspected. Gong Dai was secretly amused. Ever since he was a child, Gong Ju didn't know how many inappropriate things his sister had taken out. She seemed to have a very magical object that contained many useful things. It was just that outsiders couldn't see them. Gong Ju even thought that the reason why Gong Emo knew so many things was because she learned them from books that he couldn't understand. It was a pity that she had never told him about this, so he could not figure out what it was. Seeing Gong Yimo pass the meat patty to him, Gong Dai forced a smile. "I'll eat the wolf meat. Royal sister should eat this." As he said this, he really stuffed the wolf meat into his mouth in front of Gong Yimo. The unpleasant taste made Gong Yimo frown. The wolves in this wasteland grew up eating human meat. If they were not forced to, who would be willing to eat it? She frowned and felt around in her clothes. Then, she took out a chicken drumstick. It seemed difficult to explain. But Gong Dai had never asked since they were young. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a strange tone, "I hugged Royal Sister for a night, but I didn't know that Royal Sister was hiding something." Gong Yimo lowered her head awkwardly. It was not that she did not want to say it, but how could she explain this thing if she really said it? Gong Dai felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. He took a bite of the wolf meat and did not take the chicken drumstick that Gong Yimo passed to him. "I don't know how long it will take to get out of here. Royal sister should keep it." After he finished speaking, Gong Ju lowered his eyelids. Gong Emo didn't trust him. This knowledge made Gong Ju feel wronged and sad. His heart was filled with hostility. He was trying his best to control himself and not let himself lose his composure. Chapter 112. However, the bitterness under that anger made Gong Dai feel very uncomfortable. As long as she said it, no matter what she said, he would keep it a secret. He would believe it. But why didn't Gong Yimo say anything until now? Seeing him biting the meat in a fit of anger, Gong Yimo wasn't sure if he had discovered something. She gritted her teeth, put the meat patty aside, and tore a piece of wolf meat to chew on. "Royal sister." He grabbed Gong Yimo's hand that was about to put it into his mouth. His expression was pained and helpless as he sighed. "You can't eat it." Gong Yimo looked up with a smile when her hand was grabbed. "Didn't you say you were going to stay for a long time? Why can you eat it, but I can't?" Gong Dai bit his lower lip. If he had a choice, why would he let Gong Yimo eat this kind of wild beast that grew up eating human flesh? If she didn't say anything, then so be it. As long as she didn't torture him, he could continue to pretend to be deaf and mute. With that thought, he grabbed Gong Yimo's hand and pulled it towards himself bit by bit. His movements were slow, but the strength he used to grab her hand was very firm. Gong Yimo couldn't resist. In the end, he lowered his head and took the piece of wolf meat into his mouth. His black hair cascaded down, setting off his exquisite appearance. When his light pink lips touched Gong Yimo's fingertips, it made Gong Yimo's heart ache. After watching him swallow the old and fishy meat, he looked up at her and smiled. My royal sister deserves the best, regardless of the circumstances. The young man's deep voice was ear-piercing. Gong Yimo didn't expect that an unintentional action back then would allow him to retain his perfect voice. She was really lucky. She gritted her teeth and finally made a decision. She threw the meat in Gong Dai's hand onto the ground. She didn't know who she was angry at, but she stomped on it twice and stuffed the drumstick into his hand. Eat! Gong Dai was stunned for a moment, then he said helplessly, No need, I'm afraid there's not enough food. Enough. Gong Yimo interrupted him. Under his trusting eyes, Gong Yimo did not dare to look at him. She lowered her head and took out a lot of things, even though he had guessed it in his heart. When he saw this scene, Gong Dai was still shocked. This scene could only be seen in novels. Her royal sister was already extraordinary enough, but this move was beyond the scope of a human. Seeing that Gong Dai didn't say anything, Gong Yimo felt a little uneasy. Was she being too impulsive? This was definitely terrifying for ordinary people, right? She regretted it. She shouldn't have exposed it. This was her final trump card. She smiled awkwardly and explained with an uneasy expression, Actually, it's nothing. It's just that it can store things, and the things it can store are limited. It can't store living things. She originally only wanted to tell Gong Dai that this space was of little value, but she didn't expect to reveal the biggest weakness of this space. Gong Dai's heart suddenly relaxed. This was good. If Gong Yimo disappeared one day, he would definitely go crazy. Even so, his emotions were still very fluctuating. People were always uneasy about the unknown. Gong Yimo was so special, and she had such a godlike unknown power. Could she really be a god and not an ordinary person? Would she disappear one day? This thought made Gong Dai's heart tremble. He suddenly regretted forcing Gong Yimo to reveal this secret. Would she leave once the secret was revealed? Just like when she first appeared, Gong Ju inexplicably tightened his grip on Gong Yimo's hand. Seeing the eagerness in his eyes, Gong Yimo scratched her head in confusion. Royal sister. I won't tell anyone. Gong Yimo's heart relaxed. As long as you're not afraid. Royal sister, will you leave me? Gong Yimo was stunned. She didn't understand why he would say that. No matter what, you can't leave me. You can't. Before Gong Yimo could answer, she was forcefully interrupted by Gong Dai. Looking at his nervous and slightly flustered expression, Gong Yimo laughed. She worried for nothing. This was a child she raised. What problem could there be? This is my home. How can I leave? As she spoke, she picked through the pile of things on the ground. Then, her eyes lit up. There's wine. There's actually so much left. You're in luck. We haven't seen each other for so long. Let's drink some wine and chat. Don't be so nervous. Relax. Gong Dai was convinced. He was originally flustered, but when he heard Gong Yimo's words, he strangely calmed down. Sometimes, he really couldn't understand royal sister's thoughts. He was clearly so nervous and panicked, but she completely couldn't accept this relationship. She could even ask him to drink. Gong Dai sighed helplessly. It seemed like this was the first time they drank wine. But he was feeling very complicated. Why did it seem like such a big matter was not worth mentioning when it came to royal sister? Gong Yimo felt that a child past the age of 12 was considered a teenager and could drink. So, she gave Gong Dai a small wine bag, thinking that he couldn't drink much. Little did she know that the teenager had once killed someone with strong alcohol. Take it. Don't think too much. It's already afternoon and it's snowing heavily. Let's rest during the day and get ready to move at night. Gong Yimo didn't want to talk too much about the dimensional space, so she just kept drinking. At this time, they were sitting in the cave with a bonfire in front of them. Looking up, they could see the falling snow. If it weren't for the fact that they were being chased, Gong Yimo wouldn't be in a hurry to leave with food and drink. Seeing that she didn't mind, Gong Dai let go and really started chatting with her. They talked about everything from the capital to Shizhou, from wells to canals. In the end, Gong Yimo was a little drunk. She looked up at the gray sky and the falling snow outside and couldn't help but sigh. The snow in Shizhou was very beautiful. Because the cave wasn't deep, sitting in front of the bonfire, snowflakes would occasionally be blown in by the wind. Gong Yimo thought that if there were a few scholars here, she would probably have to compose a poem. Just like this, they watched the falling snow while drinking. They talked less and less, and in the end, they were just drinking. A jar of good wine went into Gong Yimo's stomach. Gong Dai took the wine bag that Gong Yimo gave him and tasted it bit by bit. He almost didn't drink much. Call me when it's night time. After Gong Yimo finished speaking, she passed out in a daze. Her internal injuries hadn't recovered and sleeping was the best way to heal them. Gong Dai carried her back and went out to find a lot of dead branches and grass. Although people like them who practice martial arts had internal energy to protect their bodies, Gong Dai could feel that Gong Yimo was weak and was afraid that she would catch a cold again. After doing all this, he gently lay down beside Gong Yimo and sighed in satisfaction. If only there were only him and royal sister in the world, then he wouldn't have to restrain himself like this. Chapter 113. It was still snowing and the bonfire was burning brightly, making the small space very warm. Gong Dai realized that as long as Gong Yimo was by his side, he didn't seem to want to think about anything. His entire mind was filled with only her. Gong Yimo had drunk some wine and was in a deep sleep. Her long eyelashes fluttered as if she was dreaming. Now that she had told Gong Dai all her secrets apart from her rebirth, she naturally felt more assured about this person. Sensing Gong Dai's approach, Gong Yimo subconsciously turned over, hugged his neck, and even rubbed against him. Her sudden hug made Gong Dai's entire body tense up. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly, as if he would disturb her. After waiting for a long time, Gong Yimo didn't make any further moves. Gong Dai slightly relaxed, but also felt a little disappointed. At this moment, they were so close that if Gong Dai moved forward a little, he would be able to suck on her red lips. His Adam's apple moved, and he couldn't help but remember, the last time he kissed her was 1.5 years ago. And that time, he was panicking and afraid, so it was just a light touch. If it was just a hug, he could still control himself, but once he thought about kissing, Gong Dai felt more nervous than when he killed someone for the first time. His palms were sweaty as he hugged Gong Yimo. He pursed his lips, held his breath, and gently pressed his lips on hers. Gong Dai had been holding his breath until the moment he touched her lips. Then, he couldn't help but let out a soft, satisfied sigh, his lips gently rubbed against hers. That soft touch made him feel as if his entire body was wrapped in clouds. The whole world was silent, and there was only her. Everything was her. At this moment, Gong Yimo suddenly moved. He hurriedly retreated like a frightened deer. He looked at her with a panicked expression. In the end, he realized that Gong Yimo was still sleeping. Only then did he start to breathe. His heart was beating very fast. When he kissed her just now, his heart seemed to have stopped beating. When he let go of her, it came back to life and he could breathe again. His white jade-like face was dyed with a touch of color, and his black jade-like eyes seemed to be flowing with water. He was as beautiful as a fairy. Only at this moment did he have the purity and shyness of his age. It was as if he was a fish in a clear spring, and his whole person became lively. Gong Yimo didn't know anything about this. When they were young, they had squeezed on the same bed many times. It was just that he was too young at that time and didn't know anything. After they left the cold palace, they had to hug each other to sleep. So, if it was just the two of them. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo in a daze. His fingers traced her face. When his heartbeat calmed down a little, he couldn't wait to lean forward again. His hand supported himself on the haystack beside her head, and he lowered his head to kiss her gently. Only this time, he wasn't satisfied with just a light taste. He gently traced the shape of her lips. Her lips still had the fragrance of the pear blossom wine that she drank just now. It was sweet and almost drove him crazy. Gong Dai felt his heart beating faster and faster. His ears couldn't hear anything again. His entire mind was blank. No, he could hear it. He could hear their breathing entangled together. He could hear his slight panting and he could hear his deafening heartbeat. Why was she so sweet? So sweet. His fingers tightly grasped the clothes he put on the haystack. At this moment, his body didn't stick to Gong Yimo. Instead, it was tense and suspended in the air. However, it didn't mean that he didn't want to get closer. It was as if something was calling him to do so. Gong Dai's body sank down bit by bit. Gently, he stuck to Gong Yimo. The fire crackled, and one or two sparks exploded. The sky outside the cave had already darkened. It was snowing heavily, but Gong Dai didn't notice any of this. His whole person was immersed in Gong Yimo's sweetness. Hugging her, kissing her. He had wanted to do this for a long time. But at that time, there were other people's eyes everywhere. He could only restrain himself. But here, in this cave where only they were present, Gong Dai felt like a beast that had been suppressed for a long time had awakened. It was roaring. Roaring. He wanted to break free. He impatiently sucked on Gong Yimo's lips. He was extremely careful and crazier as he explored everything about her. He originally thought that he could control it. But when his hand touched Gong Yimo's waist, that touch of warmth and smoothness almost drove Gong Dai crazy. He should be careful. What if he woke up Gong Yimo? But he couldn't control it anymore. He hugged her tighter and tighter. It was as if he wanted to squeeze her entire body into his body. As their lips intertwined, he became more and more unrestrained. He even thought that it would be good if Gong Yimo woke up. Seeing his feelings. Seeing him go crazy for her. Seeing him kissing her so passionately. When he thought about how he would do such a thing to Gong Yimo under her indifferent gaze, he felt his whole body tremble with excitement. He wanted it so much, he really wanted it, so what if he was her younger brother? So what if they were blood relatives? When he was 9 years old, he was drugged by a palace maid. Even though the palace maid failed to seduce him in the end, he already understood what was going on between a man and a woman. There were many people who got married at the age of 14. He already wanted no one else but her. After being tormented like this, Gong Yimo finally felt a little impatient. In a daze, she pushed Gong Dai away. Her reaction made Gong Dai nervous and tremble, but he couldn't help but hug her even tighter. Just like this, she found out about his feelings. Gong Yimo only felt as if she was trapped by something. She couldn't even breathe. Someone was tossing and turning in bed, ravaging her lips and stealing her breath. She couldn't help but mutter, stop fooling around." Her voice was so soft and cute. Gong Dai let go of her lips and looked up at her. But he saw that she was still in a deep sleep. She didn't seem to have any intention of waking up. Her eyes were dangerous and dark. If she let him do whatever he wanted, he really wouldn't be able to control himself. At this moment, there seemed to be the sound of horse hooves. Gong Dai was originally in a daze, but when he listened carefully, it was actually the sound of horse hooves. Looking at the beauty in his arms, Gong Dai secretly cursed. He hurriedly carried Gong Yimo and wrapped her in his coat. Braving the wind and snow, he rushed out. Not long after they left, a group of people arrived at the cave. When it snowed heavily, the miasma in the barren miasma plains would dissipate. They had been searching for the entire day. The heavy snow kept falling, which allowed them to find this place safely and smoothly. This group of people were all very tall, and judging from their imposing manner, they were all brave warriors. The leader saw the wolf meat on the ground, picked it up and pinched it. Then, he looked at the fire and narrowed his eyes. "Quickly chase after them. We must find them before the heavy snow covers their footprints." "Yes. Great General." Gong Dai secretly scolded himself. He had let his guard down. Now that the other party had the advantage in numbers, it wasn't good to fight them head-on. They could only use their wits. As the cold wind blew, Gong Yimo gradually woke up. The moment she woke up, she saw Gong Dai carrying her and running. The heavy snow fell on his hair. But she was covered by a coat, so there wasn't any snow on her body. "What's wrong?" Seeing that she had woken up, Gong Dai was a little annoyed. "Nothing, you can continue to rest. But if there are pursuers, I can shake them off." Chapter 114. When Gong Yimo heard that there were pursuers, she could no longer sleep. She secretly cursed herself for causing trouble due to her internal injuries. If not for her injuries, she would not have been so passive. She saw that the sky was already dark and said in annoyance, "It's already so late. Didn't I tell you to wake me up? Or was it because I was drunk?" She patted her head and asked Gong Dai to put her down. Gong Dai knew that she was still injured and refused to agree. However, Gong Yimo had authority after all. When she glared at him, he did not dare to disobey. Looking at the endless snowy night behind them, Gong Yimo said, "You said that they came here on horses." Gong Dai nodded. Gong Yimo looked at the snow on the ground that reached her feet and sighed inwardly. It had only been a day and the snow was already so thick. "We won't be able to outrun their horses if we keep running like this. It would be great if we could snatch one." Gong Dai was also thinking about this problem. Now that they could not erase their footprints, he was worried about Gong Yimo's health if they were to fight recklessly. "I have an idea." Gong Yimo smiled slyly and took out a few things from her space. It was a thunder fire that she made that was similar to a thunderbolt bullet. It was not lethal, but if they were on horses, it would be much easier. Hence, after a discussion, they split up. Gong Yimo hid behind a big rock. Indeed, not long after, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. Just when the first scout noticed that the footprints were not right and wanted to return to report, Gong Yimo threw the thunder fire under his horse. The fire and the sound of the explosion made the horse go crazy. It neighed and ran straight into the night. "There's an ambush." That person could not help but shout. He was taken away by the frightened horse in an instant. The commotion caused the team behind to immediately be on guard. Gong Yimo did not want to be entangled. She succeeded in getting her way and quickly ran in the direction of the frightened horse. When the pursuers saw that there was no movement, the leader of the group cursed and continued to chase after them. What surprised Gong Yimo was that the horses they were riding were all rare and valuable. Otherwise, how could they run so fast? Gong Yimo felt that she was about to be overtaken by the people behind her even though she was using her qin gong. Now, he could only hope that Gong Dai would be successful. She ran as if her life depended on it. She heard the sound of the wind behind her and instinctively dodged. An arrow fiercely sank into the snow, causing her heart to tremble. When she raised her head, the other party was already very close. She could almost see the other party's deep, hawk-like eyes staring coldly at her. This person, could he be Lu Yi, the famous god of death? Gong Yimo gritted her teeth and threw the last of her lightning fire at them. Then, he turned around and continued running. This time, they were prepared. Moreover, the thunder fire did not have any destructive power. They quickly controlled their horses and continued to chase. Great General! What kind of hidden weapon did he just use? It actually exploded when it landed on the ground. Someone else said, I heard that someone broke out of the encirclement yesterday and used an unknown weapon to attract attention. Could this be the Dai Yute state secret weapon? The leader of the group laughed coldly. If you want to know, you can just capture him and interrogate him. As he spoke, he took out a second arrow. He squinted his eyes and aimed at Gong Yimo again. It was very difficult to aim on horseback, but this person had such a talent. He could see in the dark and shot another arrow. That arrow was like a ray of silver light in the night. It was aimed at Gong Yimo's back with irresistible force. But only a crisp sound was heard. The arrow was deflected by a rock and fiercely sank into the snow. Gong Dai rode a horse and rushed over. He looked at the person who shot the arrow with murderous eyes. He stretched out his hand and Gong Yimo tacitly jumped onto the horse. Are you okay? Gong Dai asked. He had spent some time taming this horse. Almost. Gong Yimo was almost injured. Gong Yimo hugged his waist and rested. I'm fine. Gong Dai was still worried. They have people who can see in the dark and are very good at archery. Royal sister, sit in front of me. Gong Yimo smiled when she heard this. Don't worry. As she spoke, she took out a wooden shield from her storage space. I came to save you, but I've already made preparations. Gong Dai was still worried, but the people behind him were hot on his heels. He had no time to say more and could only urge the horse to gallop forward. The people behind him chased relentlessly. When they got closer, the leader sneered, "How stupid." As he spoke, he interlocked his thumb and index finger, put it between his lips and let out a long whistle. It was said that an old horse knew the way. These horses were all raised by him, so how could they listen to an outsider? As he spoke, the horse under Gong Dai let out a long neigh. Its front hooves were raised high, and it actually stopped galloping. Gong Dai was thrown by the horse and quickly pulled the reins. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the leader knocked his bow again and shot an arrow in one smooth motion. An arrow was flying straight towards them. However, Gong Dai had no time to care about it. He pulled out a dagger and stabbed it into the horse's body. The horse under him let out a miserable cry and galloped forward again. The arrow also sank into the shield. The huge impact caused Gong Yimo to fall onto Gong Dai. Royal sister. What's the matter? Gong Dai asked anxiously. Gong Yimo exclaimed, he's really strong. He's not easy to deal with. Let's go quickly. Gong Dai then galloped forward, and the horse under him seemed to not care about its life. It actually managed to shake off the pursuers. The general was so angry that his face turned ashen. He quickly gave a secret signal to the border guards to surround them. Unexpectedly, another team arrived just in time. When Gong Dai reached the border, they engaged in a chaotic battle with Lu Ye's men. It was the emperor's elite troops. They were finally here. Gong Dai took advantage of this opportunity to snatch a long spear and prepared to fight his way out of the encirclement. Gong Yimo also had a hidden sword in her hand. Wherever she went, the snow was dyed red with blood. They cooperated very well. Gong Dai charged forward while Gong Yimo guarded against sneak attacks. They galloped forward with irresistible force. The elite troops protected them as they retreated. Their weapons clashed in the night sky, creating sparks. Under the deterrence of Gong Dai, who was like a god of death, the group quickly fought their way out of the encirclement and reached the border. At this time, the pursuers behind them finally arrived. Looking at the old general who had guarded Shizhou for 10 years, the leader stopped his horse and stared at them. "Grandfather." Gong Ju saw the old man in armor at a glance and called out to him. Seeing that Gong Dai was still alive, Jinshi of Gojoseon felt a lump in his throat and almost cried. However, now was not the time for romance. He ordered his men to engage the pursuers in battle. His eyes were fixed on the young general across the battlefield. Jinshi of Gojoseon was able to reach his position because he was skilled in martial arts. He had also heard of the person opposite him. He was Lu Ye's youngest general and had excellent archery skills. The two of them looked at each other and joined the battle together. Jinshi of Gojoseon only had one thought, and that was to stop them. Chapter 115. Most of Lu Ye's troops had been withdrawn, but there were still quite a few of them left. Many of them were still on their way. Jinshi of Gojoseon had 70,000 troops under him, and they were also on their way. Therefore, they were not afraid of him in terms of numbers. Gong Dai knew that this massacre had started because of him. As long as he could fight his way out of the encirclement and return to Daiyu State, Lu Yi would have no choice but to withdraw his troops no matter how unwilling he was. Therefore, he did not look back and continued forward. As blood splattered everywhere, it seemed to have dyed his eyes red. His killing power was too strong, and with Gong Yimo's protection, he was not hurt at all. Seeing that the most important person was about to leave, and the troops stationed in Daiyu State were gathering, he was blocked by Jinshi of Gojoseon. The general gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. He released the signal while watching Gong Dai leave unwillingly. Now, he could only hope that there were a few checkpoints left and that someone would be able to stop Gong Dai. As the signal flare shot into the sky, Lu Ye's troops all around seemed to have gone crazy. They were all searching for and intercepting Gong Dai and his wife. Gong Dai kept moving forward. Along the way, he had killed countless people. Lu Ye's scattered soldiers were everywhere. They looked at him as if he was their father's murderer. He could not stop for even a moment. He could not stop either. The sooner he returned to Daiyu State, the fewer people his grandfather's subordinates would die. Only then would royal sister be safe. This was a race against time, and it was a battle of life and death. It only gradually subsided before dawn. When the last enemy fell, the horse under Gong Dai finally collapsed. Gong Dai quickly dodged and jumped off with Gong Yimo behind him. Looking up, he could vaguely see the huge city walls shrouded in the dusk. Gong Dai's blood-stained face finally revealed a smile. "Royal sister. Do you see us? We're out." However, he did not get an answer. The cold and wet feeling in his hand made his heart tremble. When he lowered his head, Gong Yimo's pale face was almost transparent under the morning light. He could not help but look at the broken shield on the ground. Along the way, Gong Yimo had used this shield to block countless attacks for him. The most obvious thing was the arrow that was deeply embedded in the shield. That person's strength was not only strong, but the arrow also pierced through the shield. He even injured Gong Yimo. Gong Ju felt as if his whole body had been hit by something. He hugged her tightly and almost couldn't return to his senses. Could it be that royal sister had endured her injuries to protect him all this while? Had she fought her way out with him? He was really useless, really useless. He actually injured her. How could he let her get hurt in front of him? This feeling made him feel as if he had returned to the night in the cold palace when he was 9 years old. That night, Gong Yimo killed 13 people and hugged him in front of the emperor. She was seriously injured, but she fought for him. But he had worked hard for so many years and done so many things. In the end, he was still the one who was protected. When he carried her into the city, Gong Dai did not stop thinking. Why was he still so weak? Yesterday, he was still thinking that as long as he could be with Gong Yimo, he did not want to be a prince. He did not want power. But today, reality had given him a hard blow. Without status, without power, how could he protect the person he loved? How could he? Gong Yimo's breathing was very light. It was so light that it was almost non-existent. She was just like when she was recovering in Taiji Palace. She was just as pale. Just as fragile. As if she would leave him in the next second. No, he would not allow it. The overlapping figures gradually ran over. The guards of the West Province took a closer look and exclaimed in surprise. It's His Highness. His Highness is back. He's still alive. Quickly open the city gates. His words made many people move. Their running was mixed with cheers. What Gong Dai had done had already spread throughout the West Province. If it were not for Gong Dai, they might have been ambushed by Lu Ye's men and killed without a trace. Luckily, he was there. But before the soldiers could open the city gates, the gates were kicked open by Gong Dai. At this moment, his eyes were bloodshot and his black hair was messy. He was hugging someone like a crazy demon. Doctor. Where's the doctor? Before the soldiers had time to congratulate him, they were frightened by Gong Ju's appearance. For a long time, Gong Ju had been humble and approachable. They had never seen Gong Ju like this. At this time, when he stared at them, they felt as if they were being cut by a knife. The doctor is at the clinic. At this time, where could the doctor be if not at the clinic? When Gong Dai heard this, he immediately ran to the nearest clinic. You must make it in time. Nothing must happen to royal sister. Originally, the doctor was very dissatisfied when the gates were kicked open. But when he saw Gong Dai, his dissatisfaction immediately disappeared. But before he could say anything, he was dragged to the front of the bed by Gong Dai. Save her. The doctor was shocked by him and hurriedly looked at the person on the bed. The little girl in front of him seemed to have lost a lot of blood and looked extremely weak. The doctor stroked his beard and shook his head. Her condition doesn't look too good. Your Highness, you... The rest of his words were blocked in his throat by Gong Dai's murderous gaze. It was too scary. Was this really the gaze of a human and not a beast? He stared at the doctor expressionlessly. His pale face, red eyes, and black hair formed the most soul-stirring appearance. But at this moment, his murderous aura was wanton, as if it was real. His forbearing and cold voice rang out word by word. Save her. Otherwise, I will bury your entire family with her. His words were like a curse that deeply trapped the doctor. The poor old man's body trembled and his legs trembled. He was convinced that if he really couldn't save this person, the other party would definitely do that. Yes. Yes, yes, I will save her. I will. This treatment took the entire morning. Just as he was sweating profusely, Jinshi of Gojoseon finally returned. After Gong Dai left, the other party didn't harass him and retreated early. He was slightly injured, but when he heard that the princess was injured, he hurriedly bandaged his wounds and brought many doctors over, hoping to help. When the doctors came in, they saw Gong Dai standing by the bed like a demon god. They didn't dare to move. Sensing the arrival of people, Gong Dai's eyes moved and locked onto them. He opened his mouth and his voice was a little hoarse. Come here and save her, or die. The word die was said by him expressionlessly, and it was filled with murderous intent. They didn't have time to think about the change in Gong Dai's attitude. They only knew that they had to listen to him quickly. Otherwise, their lives would be in danger. Many people gathered around the bed. Under Gong Dai's cold stare, they were sweating profusely. Jinshi of Gojoseon couldn't stand it anymore and came over to persuade him. Don't be nervous. The princess will be fine. However, his words didn't receive a response for a long time. Jinshi of Gojoseon looked over and saw that under Gong Dai's cold expression, his entire body was trembling uncontrollably. He wasn't threatening them, he was afraid. He was actually afraid. This realization made Jinshi of Gojoseon's heart tremble. He couldn't help but look at the little girl on the bed. At this moment, her face was pale, like a lifeless doll. You're right. She will be fine. After a while, Gong Dai's lips trembled as he said these words word by word. Nothing is allowed to happen to her. Chapter 116. Gong Dai did not know how many people came in and out, but his eyes were fixed on Gong Yimo. It was as if he could not see the anxiety, uneasiness and seriousness on the faces of the others. Jinshi of Gojoseon could not stand it anymore. He pulled someone aside and asked, "How's the situation?" That person looked at Gong Dai carefully. When he saw that Gong Dai was not looking at him, he was slightly relieved and whispered to Jinshi of Gojoseon. The situation is not good. I thought it was just an external injury. Who knew that there was poison on the arrow? Luckily, she took the antidote in time and is still here. However, this little girl's internal injury has not recovered. Now that she has lost too much blood, I'm afraid. His words were frozen by a murderous aura. When he looked up, he saw that Gong Dai was glaring at him fiercely. Suddenly, his lips curled into a cold smile. It was hair-raising. Afraid of what? His voice was as light as a feather, but it made the doctor's Adam's apple move, his lips tremble, and his face turned pale with fright. How could he still say anything? Jinshi Wang hurriedly waved his hand to dismiss him. The doctor immediately trotted away. When he went out, he even tripped because of his weak legs. Jinshi of Gojoseon sighed. Don't worry, Your Highness. I have posted a recruitment notice for famous doctors. The princess will be fine. Gong Dai did not seem to hear Jinshi of Gojoseon's comforting words. Instead, he looked at Gong Yimo again. His expression suddenly became sorrowful. They had only reunited for a few days and he had already implicated her again. This hatred and self-reproach made him feel as if his heart was about to split open. Why, was he still not strong enough? Gong Yimo was unconscious because of the poison and excessive blood loss. Gong Dai insisted on feeding her ginseng soup every day. Only then did she look healthy again. The reward on the list had been raised from 5,000 taels of gold to 100,000 taels of gold by Gong Dai. However, there was only one condition. Those who could not be cured would be cut in half at the waist. As a result, many quacks were scared off, and many people sighed. Since no one came, Gong Ju secretly sent a lot of people to capture the so-called famous doctors. However, many of these people were angered by Gong Ju and killed many of them in a fit of anger. Just like that, 7 days passed. These 7 days were so long. Gong Yimo could not help but become thinner and weaker. This made Gong Dai so mad that he wanted to kill someone several times. The entire residence of Jinshi of Gojoseon was filled with a tense atmosphere. No one dared to speak loudly. He didn't know who that little girl was. She actually made His Highness, who was like a fairy child, become like a demon. What they didn't know was that he was originally a demon god, but he had concealed himself because of Gong Yimo. Now that she was in trouble, Gong Dai was like a trapped beast, frantically trying to break free from his cage and tear the whole world apart. And all of this had changed because of the arrival of a certain person. You said that you can save her. Gong Ju's pair of cold eyes stared at the newcomer. The man was probably in his 20s, but he didn't look like a good person. He was obviously a man, but he was dressed in bright red clothes. Although his face was handsome, it was very evil. Every time he looked at people, it was as if he was scheming against them. It was disgusting. Hearing Gong Dai's question, the other party took a sip of water from a trifling cup. Then, he raised the corner of his mouth and smiled at Gong Dai. At the same time, he sized up Gong Dai. That's right. I can save her. Tell me your name. The man smiled again. There was an indescribable evil in his smile. Si Wuyen. Gong Dai immediately remembered who this person was. Gue Jiancho, Si Wuyen. It was said that his medical skills were superb, and he had a ruthless personality. Although his medical skills were superb, he didn't easily save people. In other words, even if he saved people, he would kill them in the end. It was as if life and death were just a game. Just like a rumor that had spread before. A woman had somehow met him and learned that his medical skills were superb. She begged him to save her husband, and Si Wuyen only made one request. If the woman could stay in a brothel for a day, he would save her. The woman loved her husband so much that she gritted her teeth and agreed. She didn't expect Si Wuyen to save the man that night and personally bring him to the brothel to find his wife. When the man saw the woman, he was furious. He refused to listen to her explanation and wanted to divorce her. The woman was heartbroken. Although she was still a virgin, she had to die to prove it. After the woman jumped into the lake, Si Wuyen smiled and told her husband the reason. He said that all of this was just a joke. Who knew that she would die just like that? He also said that his wife had been protected by him all this time. She was in the brothel, but no one touched her. When the man heard this, he was so regretful that he didn't want to live. After getting drunk, he jumped into the same river and killed himself. When the corpse was salvaged, Si Wuyen was sitting on the bridge in his iconic red clothes. He was drinking and laughing at the same time. Fearing his methods, no one dared to criticize him, but his bad reputation spread. There were countless similar incidents, so Si Wuyen's reputation in the 4 countries was very bad. Gue Jiancho, Gue Jiancho. Firstly, his medical skills were superb. If he wanted to save someone, even the king of hell couldn't pull him away. Secondly, his character was too unpredictable, ruthless, and vicious. Even ghosts were afraid of him. Many fragments of Si Wuyen's bad reputation flashed through Gong Dai's mind, but he only remembered one thing. This person's medical skills were superb. I want you to save someone. What do you want? Si Wuyen blinked and leaned against the armrest. He supported his chin with the back of his hand and said lazily, Save who? You. What price are you willing to pay? Gong Dai lowered his eyelids and said softly, Save my family. Oh. He seemed to be interested. How close? Gong Dai glanced at him coldly with a hint of murderous intent. You just have to say your conditions. Si Wuyen saw him like this and couldn't help but touch his chin. Then what are you willing to pay? Gong Dai didn't hesitate at all and looked straight at him. My everything. His words were so straightforward that Si Wuyen was a little stunned. But soon, he revealed a strange smile. Including your life. Including my life. Only then did Si Wuyen smile and rub his palms together. What should I do? There seems to be something fun. I wonder if the famous royal siblings of Dai Yu State will be fun. When Gong Yimo woke up, she felt very weak. She felt that her internal organs were in pain. Someone was feeding her a bowl of something very thick. She swallowed it subconsciously. There was a fishy taste. It was bitter and astringent, making her want to vomit. And she did so. She vomited out the medicine that was fed to her. The smell of the medicine was so strong that she almost fainted. You're awake. Gong Dai said happily. When Gong Yimo woke up and saw Gong Dai's ghostly pale face, she was really shocked. Gong Dai was originally fair, the kind that wouldn't get tanned under the sun. But at this moment, his face was frighteningly pale. At first glance, Gong Yimo couldn't accept it. What happened to you? She hadn't spoken for a long time. Her throat was very uncomfortable, but she still expressed her concern. Chapter 117. When Gong Dai saw that she had woken up, he revealed a pale but gentle smile. I'm fine. It's good that you're awake. Gong Yimo frowned. How could this be considered fine? She was about to speak when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her insides. Yes, she had been poisoned. However, she had been running for her life and did not dare to let Gong Dai know that she had taken the antidote. But looking at her now, the poison had not been neutralized. She did not know what kind of poison could be so powerful. Seeing her frown, Gong Yimo became anxious again. Are you all right? I'll call the doctor. Gong Yimo pulled him back. She wanted to say that she was fine, but when she touched Gong Dai's wrist, he reflexively dodged. Gong Yimo felt that it was strange. She unconsciously pulled up his sleeve to take a look. There were knife marks all over. What's going on? Gong Yimo's expression immediately turned serious. She remembered clearly when they had fought their way out of the encirclement. Gong Dai was not injured. Then where did these wounds come from? Why did it look like they had been cut by herself? There were a total of 7. Gong Dai withdrew his hand and smiled. I'm fine, royal sister. Wait here, I'll call the person who treated you. Wait. Gong Yimo coughed softly and asked him again with a grave expression. Let me ask you, what's with these wounds? Naturally, it's because of you, a rather sinister voice came from afar. Gong Yimo raised her head and was dazzled by Si Wuyen, who was dressed in a bright red robe. Her pupils shrank. It was actually him. Gong Yimo lowered her eyelids and suppressed the doubts in her heart. She asked without batting an eyelid. What do you mean? Si Wuyen laughed heartily. I told him that you had injured your core due to excessive blood loss. Only by using the blood of your blood kin could you be saved. So these wounds on his body were all cut when he let your blood out. What? Gong Yimo flew into a rage. Others might not know, but how could she not know? She and Gong Dai were not related by blood at all. However, the fact that she was able to wake up now proved that the blood wasn't related by blood. It was complete nonsense. However, Si Wuyen did not know that. Seeing Gong Yimo's angry expression, he said, not only did you lose a lot of blood, but you were also poisoned. My prescription is not wrong. Now that you are still poisoned, it seems that your blood contribution is not enough. If this drags on, the poison will enter your lungs and I can't do anything about it." As he spoke, he frowned and pretended to be concerned. "But this young man has lost too much blood recently. If he bleeds more, he will probably die. But if he doesn't bleed, you will die. What do you think we should do?" "I have no problem. I can continue." After coldly saying this to Si Wuyen, Gong Dai turned his head and smiled at Gong Yimo. Although he looked tired, there was a hint of satisfaction. "That's great. You're finally awake." Gong Yimo's heart ached when she saw his smile. She said fiercely, "Someone come." A servant hurriedly walked in. Gong Yimo said, "Boil another bowl of the medicine that I usually use. I spat it out just now." When the servant heard this, he looked directly at Gong Dai. He knew clearly that the medicine that this young miss wanted to use must be mixed with His Highness's blood. However, Gong Dai seemed to be used to it. He rolled up his sleeves, as if he wanted to stab himself again. Gong Yimo hurriedly pulled him back and said to the servant, "Use chicken blood or pig blood. Go." Si Wuyen chuckled. "That won't do. The medicine that I prescribe will be affected if there is even the slightest difference." Gong Dai patted the back of Gong Yimo's hand and said in a low and obedient voice, "Don't worry, I'm fine." It would be strange if he was fine. Gong Yimo secretly cursed Si Wuyen in her heart for killing without spilling blood. She directly said to the servant, "Why aren't you going?" When the servant heard this, he hurriedly left. However, Gong Dai felt that something was wrong. Originally, he didn't believe Si Wuyen's words. However, after he tried his prescription once, Gong Yimo's complexion improved a lot. That was why he repeatedly let out his blood to prescribe medicine for Gong Yimo. However, Gong Yimo firmly held him back and said sternly, "When have I ever lied to you? Don't you believe me?" Gong Dai couldn't help but think that Gong Yimo really had never lied to him. That was why he didn't say anything even though he was still a little hesitant. He was too tired. He had lost too much blood and too little sleep. Whenever he thought about this, his entire head would ache. At this moment, Gong Yimo woke up. He also felt that his eyes were dry and burning. He leaned his head on her shoulder and wanted to hug her to sleep. The medicine was quickly sent over. As it was often simmered, Gong Yimo took it and was about to drink it. At this moment, Si Wuyen's cold voice sounded. He felt very unhappy that he didn't see the scene of the siblings killing each other, so his tone became displeased. "You have to think carefully. The medicine is very strong. Without his blood mixed in to combine the medicine's medicinal properties, you'll definitely die if you drink it." When Gong Dai heard this, his originally drowsy mind immediately cleared up. He looked at the medicine bowl and whispered to Gong Yimo, "Just use my blood. I'm really fine." Si Wuyen looked at Gong Dai in amusement. This young boy was really wholehearted, but this girl, when faced with her own life, he wanted to see how she would choose. Who knew that Gong Yimo didn't even need to choose? She blocked Gong Dai with one hand and poured the medicine down her throat with the other. Gong Dai suddenly became nervous and widened his eyes. This medicine was really disgusting. It was bitter and astringent. She even suspected that Si Wuyen had deliberately added salt to it to prank her. Seeing that she really drank it, Gong Dai anxiously looked at her expression. Si Wuyen's smile was a little stiff. He really didn't expect that someone would disregard her life like this. Was she really not afraid of death, or was she really confident that her judgment was right? Boring, not fun at all. Gong Yimo's bitter little face scrunched up, but she still gave Gong Dai a smile that was uglier than crying. "See, I'm fine. This person is too evil. He did it on purpose. Seeing that Gong Yimo was really fine, Gong Dai heaved a sigh of relief. He no longer had the energy to find trouble with Si Wuyan. He was really too tired, so he leaned on Gong Yimo and fell asleep. Gong Yimo was shocked. Seeing that he was just sleeping, she couldn't help but feel sorry. She didn't dare to wake him up. She could only stare fiercely at Si Wuyan. Why was this person so evil? He was really just like his mother. His entire heart was completely black. Si Wuyan didn't seem to see her fierce gaze. He lazily yawned. Don't think of doing anything to me. There's still poison in your body. It's Lu Ye's most famous scorpion poison. Without me, you'll definitely die. Gong Yimo sneered. Anyway, you didn't really want to save me. Who doesn't know that the famous Gue Jian Cho Si Wuyan is famous for being cold-blooded? You saved people just to change the way they die. It's nothing more than playing around and killing a few more people. Perhaps he had other motives. Speaking of this, her expression became colder. No matter what you want to do, I can ignore it. But you heard Gong Dai. Chapter 118. She gently placed Gong Dai on the bed. Although it was a little strenuous, she still walked step by step towards Si Wuyan. Gong Yimo knew that although Si Wuyan looked arrogant, other than his superb medical skills, he was completely powerless. Seeing Gong Yimo approaching, Si Wuyan's expression finally changed. He sat up a little straighter and narrowed his eyes dangerously. How dare you? If you dare to touch a single hair on my head, you can wait for the poison to take effect and die. Gong Yimo's face was pale, but thanks to the ginseng soup that Gong Dai had fed her, after moving a little, she gradually regained some strength. These are two different matters. You saving me is one matter, but if you hurt him, that's asking for death. Gong Yimo's expression turned cold. Her slender jade-like hand gripped his throat. She didn't use any strength, but Si Wuyan's expression was tense as he looked at her with hatred. You can try. You must know that during this period, I've poisoned Gong Dai, and other than me, no one else can cure him. You're not afraid of death, but aren't you afraid of his death? Gong Yimo smiled. Her fingers gradually tightened and a cold expression appeared on her face. Even if the child I raised gets distracted because of me, he will never fall into your trap. Si Wuyan couldn't refute her words. Indeed, during this period of time, no matter how he tried to lay his hands on Gong Dai would always avoid him. He was clearly still a youth, but the way he looked at him was filled with death. Sometimes, he felt that if he hadn't saved this girl, Gong Dai would have killed him long ago. The more he thought about it, the more jealous and resentful he felt. Why? They were clearly not biological siblings from the same mother, but they understood each other so well and trusted each other so much. They were even willing to sacrifice for each other without holding back. Why? That was why he wanted to destroy it. There was no such thing as a beautiful relationship in this world. They didn't change because they weren't tempted enough. The more Si Wuyan thought about it, the more hatred he felt. Gong Yimo's fingers tightened again and again, causing him to gradually suffocate. Am I going to die? He died just like that. It was good that he was dead. He couldn't stay in this dirty world any longer. Si Wuyan's face became redder and redder. He was sitting down while Gong Yimo was standing. Her fair hands were bursting with destructive power. Her eyes were calm and tranquil, as if she was not killing people, but doing something extremely ordinary. Finally, when Si Wuyan opened his mouth and the veins on his forehead bulged, she released her hand. The sudden rush of air caused Si Wuyan to bend over violently and cough violently. He fell to the ground and could no longer maintain his usual high and mighty demeanor. His body curled up into a ball on the ground as he coughed extremely miserably. Gong Yimo's body also swayed slightly. She held on to the table by the side and closed her eyes. Just now, just a little bit more and she would have killed the other party. As the person involved, Si Wuyan knew even more clearly that Gong Yimo wasn't scaring him or joking. She really would have killed him. This knowledge made Si Wuyan feel fear in hindsight. The reason why he was able to play around with others so easily was because they all had weaknesses in their hearts and needed his help. However, he met Gong Yimo. This girl, knowing that she could die, still dared to change his prescription and drink that bowl of medicine, all because she didn't want her brother to get hurt again. When her life was in her hands, she dared to make a move just to vent her anger for her brother. Her brother was such a powerful person, but he was still manipulated by her. But she was different. It wasn't that she didn't care about her own life or her brother. She had confidence in herself and the people around her. She wasn't afraid of death, which was why she dared to do so. Therefore, Si Wuyan couldn't do anything to her. A person who wasn't afraid of death and had a strong mind had no weaknesses. Seeing that he finally caught his breath, Gong Yimo unknowingly put on a smiling face. She patted the non-existent dust off her hands. That smile actually made Si Wuyan, who was known as Gue Jianchou, feel his scalp tingle. Gong Yimo giggled and said, "I often hear people say that Gue Jianchou means what he says. If he says he will save someone, he will definitely not let them die. That's why he's known as Gue Jianchou. So me, will you continue to save, or not?" Si Wuyan was speechless. Gong Yimo only smiled. She was someone who had been reborn. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. If Si Wuyan rejected her, she had 100 ways to make him agree. Si Wuyan glared at her fiercely. He struggled to get up and sneered. "Don't worry, I will save you. Then, I will make you die even more miserably." Gong Yimo saw that he was about to leave and didn't stop him. She smiled faintly and said, "If that's the case, thank you very much." Not knowing why, seeing Gong Yimo so proud, Si Wuyan couldn't take it lying down. He thought of something and stopped. Suddenly, he smiled. "You don't know, right? That guy on the bed. Not only did I trick him to cut his wrists, I also said that I wanted his flesh as an ingredient. He really cut off a piece of his flesh. I wonder how it would feel to eat your own brother's flesh." After saying that, he saw Gong Yimo's expression change. He felt proud and elated. He laughed and left. His last sentence was like a thorn, piercing Gong Yimo's heart painfully. She rushed to the side of the bed. Her originally angry expression softened when she saw Gong Dai's pale face and turned into a faint bitterness and pain. That's right, what right did she have to be angry? Gong Dai was such an intelligent person, but he allowed Si Wuyan to manipulate him. It was all for her sake. Thinking of this, she smiled helplessly and sat next to Gong Dai. Now, she had just woken up and Gong Dai had collapsed. This was really, when Gong Dai opened his eyes again, it was already the afternoon of the next day. When he opened his eyes, he felt very dizzy. So when he saw the light purple curtain above his head, his expression was dazed for a moment. "You're finally awake." Gong Yimo's voice was full of vitality. Gong Dai came back to his senses and was a little puzzled. She was clearly so weak and pale just a moment ago. Gong Yimo's body was now recovering. As for the poison, she felt fine, so there was no need for her to appear so weak. Gong Dai looked Gong Yimo up and down. Seeing that she really looked much better, he couldn't help but smile. At this time, his face was pale and his eyes were exquisite. His smile was like a delicate porcelain that had come alive, beautiful yet fragile. Yes, fragile. This realization made Gong Yimo's heart skip a beat. In Gong Yimo's mind, Gong Dai had always been the future Gong Dai who had grown up. And he had always done well. He was sensible, intelligent, and knew when to advance and retreat. Whether it was in the cold palace or the imperial palace, he actually took care of her more in some aspects. Although Gong Yimo had always treated herself as a guardian, there were many times when she didn't do a good job. Instead, it was this child who took care of everything and didn't make her worry at all. Chapter 119. That was why she believed in Gong Dai, trusted in his ability, and unknowingly relied on him. But yesterday, when he had fallen asleep on her shoulder, his eyes had dimmed. Gong Yimo blamed herself. Perhaps she had thought of relying on him in the future, but later on, she really wanted to raise this youth well. At least, she didn't want him to become as cold and cruel as he was in her previous life. Royal sister, are you still feeling unwell? How's the poison in your body? Gong Dai rested on the bed and asked. Gong Yimo smiled, my body is much better. As for the poison, it's not a big problem. You don't have to worry about it. Gong Dai's expression showed that he didn't agree. He really couldn't ignore such a carefree person like royal sister. Gong Yimo didn't wait for him to speak and pulled up his sleeves. Seeing those wounds, her eyes flashed with a trace of heartache. That damned Si Wuyan. If it wasn't for his pitiful background, she really wouldn't have let him off like that. You're still talking about me. Look at you. Gong Yimo suddenly stopped talking and lowered her head to apply medicine on Gong Dai. Seeing Gong Yimo's unhappy expression, Gong Dai didn't dare to say anything and obediently let her apply the medicine. In fact, he had treated these wounds well himself. He also took medicine to replenish blood every day. After all, he could only take care of himself in order to take care of Gong Yimo. After all, that Si Wuyan obviously had ulterior motives. It was just that his medicine wasn't as good as the ones in Gong Yimo's space. During those few years when she was pampered, she found a lot of good things in her space. She didn't expect that it would really come in handy. Gong Yimo lowered her head and silently applied medicine on Gong Dai while using her fingers to gently trace the wounds. There were a total of 7 wounds. These were all left because of her, idiot. Do you believe everything he says? Don't you know how to do an experiment and try to make medicine without using blood? If I had woken up a little later, would you have been drained of blood by him? Gong Ju heard her words and glanced at her with a rather shy and serious smile. I won't let royal sister take any risks. Therefore, even if Si Wuyan was lying to him, he didn't dare to disobey. His words made Gong Yimo's nose sour, and she almost burst into tears. It wasn't easy for her to raise Gong Ju until he was white and tender. She even managed to remove the old scars on his body one by one. But now, because of her actions, there were a lot of scars. She felt angry and suffocated. More than that, he blamed himself. If she had been more careful at that time and had not been injured by that arrow, Gong Dai would not have ended up like this. Gong Dai sighed in his heart. He felt Gong Yimo carefully apply medicine and bandage his wounds. Her careful and cautious manner reminded him of the first time they met. She was very impatient, but she still fed him medicine. That was when he felt the most terrible. His mother had died tragically, and he had been banished to the cold palace for 2 years. He gritted his teeth and endured all kinds of humiliation and torture. He had endured it all. However, on that day, the servant girl who had sworn loyalty to him betrayed him. He was even forced to drink poison. At that time, he really thought he was going to die. His entire body was in pain, and his throat felt like it was being cut by knives. He was full of hatred and resentment. He couldn't wait to grow up and kill all these people. He also resented why he had to suffer all these hardships, while the other princes were happily hiding in their mother's arms. However, Gong Yimo appeared. Not only did she save him, she also left him food. At that time, food was very precious because she was scarily thin, and looked even more miserable than him. Later, Gong Yimo left, but he fainted. His body could not withstand the hunger and beatings at that time. He was woken up by the rain. On that night of thunder and lightning, the cold rain hit his face, and it hurt. At that time, his throat was still very painful, and he didn't know when it had started to burn. He was hungry and cold, but his body was alternating between hot and cold. When he thought about what he had been through these past few years, he couldn't help but feel disheartened. He even thought that it would be better if he just died like this. That day was really too difficult to endure. However, just as his head was getting heavier and heavier, and he was about to fall asleep, Gong Yimo's figure flashed across his mind. At that time, he thought that his royal sister was still a woman, and she had been sick for a long time, but she never gave up. She lived on strongly and even helped him. What right did he have to give up? Therefore, he gritted his teeth and endured the pain all over his body. He slowly crawled into the room, and only then did he feel relieved and faint. Before he fainted, he was worried that he would fall seriously ill, and that he would directly die of illness, or become a fool. He had once seen a palace servant who had become a fool because of a fever. If he also became a fool, he would be muddle-headed and unable to turn around for the rest of his life. It would be better for him to die. However, he was saved by someone, and it was the royal sister that he had never met before. At first, he pretended to be asleep, but when the other party wrapped a soft coat around him, it immediately drove away all the coldness. That kind of warmth was enough to make him remember it for the rest of his life. Later on, he thought more than once that the reason why God made him suffer was because he was going to send the best person in the world to his side. She would erase all his pain and resentment, and bring him all the light and happiness. And he, who had this person, was afraid that even God would be jealous of him. Therefore, he deserved all the suffering. This was also the woman he loved. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo in a daze. At this time, she lowered her head to do the final bandage. Her small mouth was pursed, as if she had been wronged, and also as if she was sulking. Those pair of beautiful eyes were full of water, but no tears fell. Gong Dai suddenly felt that to be able to receive her love, this injury was worth it. To be honest, the process of falling in love with her was both happy and painful. It was happy because her existence made people happy. It was painful because in the future, all the men could rightfully ask to marry her, but only he could not. There was a period of time when he even resented. Why did he have to like someone who was impossible? But as time passed, everything had an answer. Because there were only two choices for her, to like her, or to like her more. If there was a third choice, it would be the one he chose now. To like her, until he couldn't extricate himself. If there had to be a reason for loving her, it would be that no one could not love her after spending time with her. No one. Just as Gong Dai was sighing aimlessly, Gong Yimo pulled down his sleeve, put her hands on her hips, and looked at him very seriously. Are there any more injuries? Gong Dai was a little puzzled. No. Gong Yimo bit her lower lip and said with difficulty, yesterday, Si Wuyen told me. He said that you cut a piece of your flesh. At this point, she really couldn't bear to continue. Her small mouth pursed. Let me see the wound. Gong Dai looked a little embarrassed. It's okay. I've already applied medicine. It's already starting to scab. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.